All of our community faith leaders, please stand and turn around. We are deeply privileged to have your leadership here today, but your leadership in the field and wherever you have been working. And it's just my great pleasure to introduce Reverend Troy Lewis, who, the dedicated American who has spent his last 17 years in Zambia, reaching those in the most need. So Reverend Lewis, could you please give us our invocation?
Okay, let us pray. Dear Almighty God, we come before you with this occasion of telling the story of how you've allowed history to be made in the land where all of us have come from, and so many different parts of this world. We're thankful for your compassion, your mercy, your kindness, your long-suffering, your forgiveness, your purity, your justice, and your righteousness. To be able to create this across people groups from this great nation to reach and change this world. We're thankful, dear Heavenly Father, for all those who are here, all of us who are under the sound of my voice, made in your image, and have the privilege to serve you in the areas that we are, because of your calling and this responsibility to touch those that are so often considered the least of these. We thank you, dear Heavenly Father, for this opportunity to reflect your love, your truth. And dear Heavenly Father, as we take this time to celebrate, O Lord, and to remember all that has been done in this history that has been made, we also want to remember those who have gone and have left and departed from this world because of this scourge of HIV and AIDS. So many, O Heavenly Father, that when I arrived, be dying, O Lord, without even an aspirin to take, clawing at the walls, because of this virus. But dear Heavenly Father, we are thankful that there's a different story today, and that you've allowed us, O Lord, here, and some of us, O Lord, to be able to serve in the places, O Lord, of a great people of the countries, O Lord, around the world. Through this great nation that you have blessed, United States of America, the land of my birth. We pray, dear Heavenly Father, that we may continue and run on to reflect your truth, to reflect your love, to reflect your compassion, and that with this faith and with this courage, that we may run on and touch more of the poor, more of the suffering, more of the sick, more of the oppressed, that we may be a voice for those in compounds and in villages wondering, where are you, dear Heavenly Father? Does God hear my prayers, O Lord? And we're thankful, O Lord, that we know that you hear the prayers and that you are at work through us to be your hands, your feet, your heart. With this faith, we pray and thank you for this nation, one nation, indivisible under God, that you have blessed with this faith, that we may continue to reach to the nations, that we who are people who are all made in your image, rich and poor, of all faiths, that we may see ourselves as not separate but one. We pray, dear Heavenly Father, O Lord, that we are not people of nations, but we are people of your children. And, O Lord, who is our neighbor, O Lord? Our neighbor is all those, O Lord, who are suffering and in need. Lord, may we see this global community, O Lord, that we may reach and touch our neighbors, our brothers and our sisters, all of those who are made in your image. And the same love, the same generosity, and the same kindness that you reflected towards us. May we have that same compassion, O Heavenly Father, for those dying of HIV and AIDS, those suffering from gender-based violence, and all those, O Lord, in whatever condition they may be. And, O Lord, we pray that our better angels from you may reign over us in everything that we do. And that through this great nation, O Lord, that we may build others, O Lord, who contribute to building the global humanity of mankind. And we pray this in the name of the Almighty, the true and living God. Amen.
Thank you for that deeply inspirational prayer. I want to just start by acknowledging one of my mentors, but also the one who brings us the tools that allows us to transform nations and combat HIV/AIDS. So Dr. Fauci, thanks you for your brilliance. Thank you for the work that you have done through the years to bring us what we use today and take to scale. And Michelle Sidibe, thank you for coming, our executive director from UNAIDS. It is that strategy that we are united in today across the globe, with the determination that by 2030, we are to end this pandemic. I want to take this moment to also recognize the individuals who have been so critical in our new reauthorization that has passed both the House and the Senate, from Congresswoman Bass and Lee to Engel to Royce to Lowy, and to the Congressman we have gracing us today, Chris Smith, who has been there every step of the way to ensure, and on the Senate side, Senators Corker and Menendez, Cardin, Leahy, and Graham, who have really represented years of bipartisan support for this program. It's really terrific to reflect today on a program begun by President Bush through 3 presidents with strong support now from President Trump and 8 Congresses. That is our 15th year anniversary of PEPFAR, but also the 30th year of the World AIDS Day. Take you back those 30 years, I was actually actively engaged at Walter Reed with HIV/AIDS, mostly because I was trained as an immunologist and no one could understand why young soldiers were presenting with a destroyed immune system. And so when I thought I knew everything, and you're cocky and young, you're confronted with unbelievable humility that there is nothing to be done. There were no drugs. There was no nobility to treat, but there was one thing, there was this amazing human spirit of our patients who, even though they were sick themselves and dying, stood up and went to the street to demand more for the generation behind them. That kind of altruism, that kind of sacrifice is so woven through the fabric of our World AIDS Day, a day of both remembrance and also now a day of amazing hope. So in 1988, when I was at Walter Reed with no medication and watching people die, 10 years later, I was in Kericho, Kenya, experiencing the exact same thing. But on the grounds of a hospital that was attempting to serve others, where the matrons of the hospitals who run the nurses of all of the hospitals were turning people away day after day, person by person, because there was nothing there. Now at that time, I knew we had the drugs to save people's lives. We had the cocktail since 1996. My patients in the military that got that medication, no matter how sick they were at the time, many are still alive today. So I knew we had what it took, but we didn't have the ability to do anything. And in the midst of that depth and despair, in the midst of where the one group that stood up and stood with their communities, the leaders in the faith community who went there and stood beside the dead and the dying, who made sure that those children who had lost both parents were served, they were there, and they were doing everything to eliminate suffering. But then in 2003, I was again in Kenya, and President Bush stood up in his State of the Union address and announced PEPFAR, this historic $15 billion response, where for the first time we would be given the resources to work with countries and UNAIDS to bring a comprehensive response that would stop people from dying of this disease. Extraordinary moment that has gone on with continued support so that we are at $80 billion. And I can tell you the stress of feeling that you're responsible for the $80 billion that had preceded those results and ensure that you keep the program on track to deliver on the vision that President Bush and now President Trump have, that this could be the program that would show that foreign assistance has a beginning, middle, and end, to show that when you bring communities of faith with tribal leaders and governments together with the appropriate resources focused in a lasered way, that you could actually control this epidemic while Dr. Fauci creates a cure and a vaccine for us. So, yeah, you know, there's always pressure when you come to one of these events, putting it right on them. So in that moment, from the architect that envisioned PEPFAR to the moment we are today, 14.6 men, women, and children on treatment, mothers thriving, raising their children, babies born HIV-free, 2.4 million of those babies who now from the beginning of PEPFAR, the original initiative, which was prevention of mother-to-child transmission from 2002, they are now 16. And we have a DREAMS beneficiary here today with us because that beneficiary recognizes when you are born HIV-free or you are born in a community where HIV has had a devastating effect, we have a moral obligation to ensure people remain HIV-free. So we are excited about the 14.66 million people, but we're also very excited about the 18.9 million circumcisions. We had the information, again, based on research that NIH had done, that if young boys and men were circumcised, their risk of HIV infection was decreased by almost 65%. Now, I came out of the vaccine world. That seemed great. And you didn't have to booster. You only had to do it once. And so we're nearly at 19 million. That means 19 million of those boys and men, they're going to grow up with a much lower risk of HIV. We started that program in earnest in 2009. At the time when we had this brilliant Men and Boys program, no one stopped to say, what are we doing for the girls? What are we doing for the young women? And so it was part of that really understanding that we had to do something for the young women. UNAIDS taught us and showed us that 3 out of the 4 infections of 15 to 24-year-olds were in young women. So we sat back, we talked to people, we gathered the best science, and we launched our public-private partnership DREAMS, determined, resilient, empowered, AIDS-free, mentored, and safe young women. That program now, in its 2nd full year of execution, has now delivered again on the results that 85% of those districts continue to have decline in new infections in young women. This is what happens when communities join in partnership with focused resources, not just any resources and not just any tools, but the tools that have been shown to have an effect. And so that's why we are so excited about the power of those partnerships with the private sector. To just call out again how important the private sector was in both DREAMS and our new MenStar Coalition. Those private sector teach us and show us and use their innovations to really find how we can message to men and young women and boys in a way that will resonate. Sometimes as public health people, we think you just say it, just put those facts out there, that's good enough. Never is good enough. You have to find the right words in the right way and the right messenger. And the DREAMS ambassadors that we have and the ambassadors that we have working on the MenStar program are really focused on how to have the right words in the right place. It was the partnership that we discussed over the last couple of days, of which Secretary Pompeo came and really, I think, gave groups permission to say, those of you who are working with PEPFAR dollars through the faith-based organizations, you need to reconnect with their communities of faith in which we are serving and use that intersection between faith and technology of one church, one program, one response, to have a new day to get to the ones that we have not reached. I think it's really an extraordinary moment and opportunity for us. And so we know now, country by country, community by community, county by county, that these programs are having a success. They're having a success because we did spend 4 years realigning our program down to the absolutely nitty-gritty, but also with the Global Fund. And so the Global Fund, in deep partnership with us, ensures that not one resource is wasted, that everything is focused on achieving these very clear goals. And because of that, over the last 4 years, we've tripled the number of people on treatment. We've quadrupled the number of people receiving prevention, including circumcision and DREAMS, and we did that in a flat budget. And we have extraordinary partners who every day ask themselves, am I being as effective and efficient with those US taxpayer dollars, whether they're the 1/3 of the Global Fund or 100% of PEPFAR? What are they doing, and are we holding ourselves accountable? We're excited about the generosity of the American people. Throughout the United States, including my parents who are 90 and 94, every day still pay taxes. And it gives me a big, again, burden to ensure that their dollars, which they don't have many of, because they send a lot of it to Wycliffe, but way over that 10%. So I provide the food. I figure I'm providing their food so they can send more money to the missionaries. But in that moment, I hold myself accountable and the team accountable. And I just want to thank the team from SCAC and the agencies that are here, that have walked with us these last really tough years of really looking at everything we do and holding ourselves accountable in a very transparent and respectful way. to ensure that every generosity taxpayer dollars that have been given to us through the President and our Congress are utilized in a way that we become and are the most effective foreign assistance program that the United States has ever been part of. So I just want to introduce now the video, and then we will move to Congressman Smith. So the video, please.
There was no PEPFAR, then I died long time ago. I was tested. I was told, Mommy, if you see 2 lines, it means that you are HIV positive. So they took my blood, and then I saw the 2 lines. I wished that this earth could open and enter inside. I was scared of telling somebody about it because I knew maybe I could have been chased from the home. Because of the information from PEPFAR, I decided to come and start treatment. When I became pregnant, I went for the prevention from mother to child education. When I found out that my baby was negative at 1.5, I was so happy. Please now.
My name is Charity Wise. I would love to be a doctor when I grow up.
I thank PEPFAR very much for making my child negative, because without supporting me with the drugs and knowledge, my child could have been positive.
Thank you very much, and it's my deep pleasure, as I've mentioned in the opening, to introduce Congressman Chris Smith, to recognize him and his leadership, and also take a moment to recognize all of the staffers up in our Congress who have walked with us side by side. So, Congressman Smith.
First of all, I'll be brief, but I want to thank especially Deborah Birx for her outstanding leadership. As our global AIDS coordinator and ambassador, she is remarkable, a remarkable leader, and she is someone who not only is passionate, and you heard from her comments, and many of you have heard her before, she is not just passionate, extraordinarily competent. And it's the old idea about intentions. It's great to have good intentions, but you have to have the strategies and the means to deliver. And she works overtime, she and her staff, to ensure that the best possible strategies are crafted and that the greatest number of people with the greatest remedy are reached. So I want to thank her for that, because by sweating those details, more lives have been saved. So I can't thank you enough for your leadership. Just as we all know, every December 1st since 1988, nations from around the world have observed World AIDS Day, a day to recognize the tremendous strides made towards eradicating HIV/AIDS across the globe, a day to assess remaining challenges and promising solutions, and a day to recommit. Each year, we are closer to achieving an AIDS-free world. Much of this success is due to faith-based leadership, and I'm particularly happy that you've recognized some of the great leaders. Of course, it takes partnership between governments, secular leadership, and faith-based. But I know many of the people who are motivated by a love of God and neighbor and the corporal works of mercy for caring for the sick and for those at risk. A couple of years after PEPFAR was passed, my wife and I traveled with Shepard Smith and Anita to Uganda. We spent the better part of a week going all over the country, and we saw firsthand how the faith community, how the churches, working with the government, working with our funding and other NGO funding, was expanding the reach and ensuring that people got the good news about what needs to be done to prevent and also what needs to be done to mitigate the prevalence of this horrific disease. So I want to thank them for that. That was 2005. I had been to many countries in Africa during the 90s. I've been in Congress 38 years, and I can tell you PEPFAR was the game changer, and the faith-based community has played an extraordinarily important role in that. Every week, however, we know that much more needs to be done. UNAIDS tells us that 19,000 people die of AIDS-related diseases. Roughly 37 million people around the world are infected with HIV, and there's always the danger, the real danger, of losing the gains that have been made if we falter in our commitment. 15 years ago, as we all know, President George W. Bush initiated the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, or PEPFAR. Due to the vision of President Bush in the White House and the leadership in Congress, especially Foreign Affairs Chairman Henry Hyde and Ranking Member Tom Lantos, PEPFAR has grown into an unparalleled success that it is today. I remember Henry Hyde telling us all privately, in committee, during markup, during the hearings that led to passage, and during debate on the House floor, that AIDS was the Black Death of our time, the equivalent of the bubonic plague that wiped out approximately 60% of Europe's population. The vision then, as now, and although it has been expanded, included prevention, providing the best available medicines to mitigate the disease's progression, inhibit, then prevent mother-to-child transmission, and ultimately conquer this horrific disease. Since 2003, the program has saved an estimated 16 million lives, and 13 countries today are on track to control their HIV/AIDS epidemic by 2020. Before PEPFAR, approximately 50,000 people in Africa had access to life-saving antiretroviral treatment. Today, approximately over 14 million, as the ambassador just reminded us, receive treatment for HIV/A and AIDS. And thanks to those extraordinary medicines, some 2.2 million babies now have been born HIV-free to HIV-positive mothers. And of course, there are many others that need to be reached. And I know at the UN, we recently, a year ago, had a very important conference focusing about those that have not been reached and the need to do so. New HIV infections have declined, depending on the country, between 41 and 76%. That is real progress. When President Bush signed the U.S. leadership against HIV/AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria Act into law in 2003, when I was president at that ceremony, he said, in pertinent part, HIV/AIDS is one of the great medical challenges of our time. Across Africa, he said, this disease is filling graveyards and creating orphans and leaving millions in a desperate fight for their own lives. They will not fight alone, he went on. The legislation I signed today launches an emergency effort that will provide $15 billion over the next 5 years to fight AIDS abroad. In the face of preventable death and suffering, we have a moral duty to act, and we are acting, said President Bush. I remember, and I saw Mark Green come in a moment ago, our tremendous USAID administrator. He was our ambassador to Tanzania. He used to serve in the Congress and was a big proponent of all of these important programs. But I remember him telling me how revered President Bush was in Tanzania and in so many other parts of Africa. Sometimes we wish he would have been a little more revered here, including in my state. But he because of the work, because he had saved so many lives. As was noted by the ambassador, over $80 billion in bilateral HIV/AIDS and tuberculosis program has been provided by the U.S. government, and there's no equivalent. I mean, this is like the Marshall Plan in terms of saving an entire generation of people from a pandemic. And again, it is the U.S. taxpayer above all, but leadership like Deborah Birx that have made the difference, and President Trump and Vice President Pence as well. Let me just say a final couple of words, and I believe I'm meeting with her later on today, but again, this is just one example. Sister Mary Owens, who has worked in Kenya. She is dedicated to children. She arrived in Kenya from Ireland in 1969 and has devoted her life to saving children. And like you, she believes that every child is precious, is of infinite innate value, that needs to be protected, and that we need to look at these children as we would look at the Lord himself, as the Reverend said a moment ago, the importance, Troy Lewis, the importance of seeing these individuals as the least of our brethren. Now, of course, when our Lord said that in Matthew 25, he was not talking about least It was only in a situational context that any one of us could be the least. Those who are suffering need our help. While you are working on the front lines, I want you to know our job in Congress is to provide you with the resources. The Trump administration's 2018 PEPFAR report highlights the urgency of the HIV/AIDS crisis and affirms that we must continue to be proactive. In it, it says, in part, we all risk an epidemic that rebounds beyond the global community's capacity to respond. This has to be sustained and expanded, in no way backtracked. The time to act is now, the report says. I'm happy to say that just before Thanksgiving, the Congress acted on a bill that I had introduced, H.R. 6651, to renew PEPFAR for another 5 years. It passed the House. Last night, I'm happy to say, this bipartisan bill passed the United States Senate. And of course, a lot of the pull for this came from the administration, asking that they wanted that bill. And you know, Congress does move very slowly at times, almost all the time, and that helped to bring that bill, and the President will soon be signing that into law. Finally, I just want to say a special thanks to each of you for your compassion, your tenacity, your skill, expertise, professionalism, commitment, and above all, your love of neighbor. You have changed the world, and you will continue to change the world for the better. God bless you, and thank you.
Well, we have a special treat and a special guest today who was there 15 years ago, who was there at the very beginning of PEPFAR. And not only there at the very beginning, but in 2008 went to the floor in our House of Representatives and spoke passionately about the importance of reauthorizing PEPFAR. Many of you know it's always tough to get that first reauthorization because there's always questions about what did the word emergency mean? How long was this going to be? But this person stood up and spoke for PEPFAR on the House of Representatives. So it's my deep pleasure to introduce the Vice President of the United States, the Honorable Mike Pence. You can all be seated again. Good, so this gives me a moment to do a little bit of further reflection on the progress and to really recognize Ambassador Administrator Green, who has come. Thank you very much. Also part of that reauthorization, and she's going to kill me after this, was Katie Talento, who many people will not remember, but I do, who was in Senator Coburn's office. And it was because of her and her tenacity that we have that earmark for treatment that allows us today to continue to expand and treat those 14.6 million people. That only happened because Katie, against many other Republicans, stood strong to make sure that we had that earmark. So this bipartisan support really comes down to individuals with passion. And we see that both among the Republicans and the Democrats. Passion to ensure that this bill, in each of its reauthorization, it represents the best of what we can do with science and tools. And I just want to, again, call out the staffers. I see some of them here today. It is the staffers as well as the members who go out on these trips when they should be often back in their hometowns or out taking care of their family. At every break, they go out to the far reaches of the people that we serve to see these programs in action and come back with very detailed notes that say, this is going well, This is not going well. It was that group that went out 5 years ago that came back and said to me, I think they went to Tanzania, who said, why aren't we ensuring that all of the babies and children are tested? And it was because of that we had launched this really new OVC initiative where we asked primarily USAID and our partners on the ground to communicate to every partner if they see children who are sick, if they see children who are missing school, if they see children that look malnourished, get them tested. And that was part of our ACT initiative, Accelerating Children's Treatment, and we doubled in 2 years the number of children on life-saving ARV. This is what's possible when people go out and look and come back and make us better. And I think that kind of energy, still 15 years later, is what sustains this program. It's what makes this program stronger every day. And we're very grateful to that. I know we also have in the room representatives from our critical agencies that have made these results possible. I know they're here from CDC and the whole HHS family. Thank you. I know they're here from USAID and Peace Corps and Department of Defense and our Department of Treasury. And some of you may wonder, what is Department of Treasury doing? Well, Department of Treasury is embedding people within ministries of finance to mobilize more domestic resources in health and specifically for HIV so that we can have a moment in time as this epidemic becomes controlled, that as we sustain that response, the government is paying for that response because we've created a program that's affordable and sustainable. And I think sometimes when we talk about sustainability, we forget about the affordability piece. And we're very much focused on that because we can't turn over a program that governments cannot afford or sustain. And so we work every day with our implementing partners, and thank you, implementing partners, who have worked alongside of us as we delve into every one of your budget items and every one of your items in your work plan to ensure that we're only doing the things that are absolutely required. It's all good. Everything that we do is good. But it takes a very different look to say, is this the most required piece to have the impact that we need to have? And I really want to thank the teams who have focused on that. Many of the teams who are not here today, who are in the field, are 3,000 members of the PEPFAR family that every day wake up to work with governments and work with communities to make sure that these pieces happen. So I just want to really recognize that. I am thrilled that World AIDS Day is between our American Thanksgiving, which reminds us of our bounty and our absolutely critical character to give back to others, and our holidays, which is so much a celebration of our faith and our ability to really recognize our family and the support that they've given us through the years, and the fact that all this week we've had nothing but pizza. But it's good, because the family will get something different over the holidays. But this is what's possible when people are making sacrifices here in the United States to give us the money that we need in order to be successful, and also around the globe to be able to bring together communities and partnerships to achieve these goals. I think we are all blessed every day to be part of this HIV/AIDS community, a community that was born out of death and despair, a community of activism among the sick, where people really stood up and asked for and demanded, not for them, but for the others behind them, that there would be effective therapy, that we would have an effective vaccine one day, that we would have an effective cure. That's what this program and our advocacy was actually born out of, and I am grateful for that. If you wanted to know what she said 2 minutes. So 2 minutes, you have to listen to me. Just to give you that heads up, and I've appreciated all those people standing and maintaining their enthusiasm about what you know is happening now. And I think you know that our president is going to the G20 and is leaving us, and so our vice president has a lot of pressure on him. And for him to take out the time in this incredibly busy day, because he really wanted to recognize many of you are here today and your devotion to those who have less and need more. And you can continue to give more of yourself so that other people can survive and thrive. And I think we are at a very interesting moment. Someone asked me at a panel a couple of days ago, are we on offense or defense? And I thought, well, that's a really great analogy. And there are a whole series of countries where we are on offense. But we also have to recognize there's a whole series of countries where we're still playing defense against a very, very difficult virus, because it's because of the stigma and the discrimination that hasn't allowed us to really break down the barriers that make it possible for us to do our work. And the fact that 30 years into World AIDS Day, we're still talking about families and communities that feel disenfranchised from the ability to get the life-saving test and treatment or prevention that they need to thrive, really is a representative of what we need to do. And I was going to close with this, but before the Vice President arrives, I want to say, if you are here today, and there's over 100 of you, your job within the next 48 hours is to get to another 10 people and talk to them about how critical it is for them to know their status, and tell them to tell another 10 and another 10 and another 10. And within 5 days, we could go from your 100 to 100 million. That is the power of a single voice. And as you go back to your communities, whether you're people of faith or the group that we also had with us, the tribal leaders, if you go back, your job, if you were here today, is to tell those 10 people and to make sure that they tell the next 10. And the same way in the United States, if you're from the South, you're from an urban area where we still have problems with HIV/AIDS, your job also is to raise that awareness, because this is a moment in time that has come together. We've never had a World AIDS Day, and we've never had a moment in American history where reauthorization, the Vice President and Secretary Pompeo announcing our results all came together in the same week. It is a miracle for those of you who work in government, and that miracle has bestowed on us now a high level of moral obligation to transform what we've heard over the last 3 to 4 days into action in our communities. And I know you're going to be dedicated to do that. So as you go home for the holidays, you tell those 10 people. And they'll tell the 10 people. And I think we really are entering a time when that kind of sharing can lead to a very different future. Because right now, 50% of the men in sub-Saharan Africa who are HIV positive and who feel fine aren't diagnosed. And because of that, men are presenting in late-stage disease. So we will have a continent run by women. We don't want that. So we really want to make sure that all men have the opportunity to know their status. We need to break down their level of fear. We need to meet them where they are. It's part of our MenStar Coalition. We had groups in Lesotho who have created men's corners to make it a place where men can see other men, male nurses, male doctors, and they don't come into a clinic that's filled with moms and their babies, which was a little disenfranchising to them within that community. And I think what we've learned to do is to listen. And that was hard at the beginning, but we spent 2 days listening to our tribal leaders and communities of faith. And now we are spending a lot of time listening to men to really understand what it will take to get them into the clinic. And we don't want men going to other places like testing in bars. We want them in the clinic because in the long run, again, a sustainable system requires that men have access to health care for their hypertension, their diabetes, to prevent stroke and cardiovascular disease. So if we do this right, we not only control the HIV/AIDS pandemic, we create a system that the countries can utilize through the faith community, through our FBOs, through our NGOs, through our CBOs, and our government facility to reach the population with the preventive interventions that they need so that their populations can thrive. That's what we're responsible for. Now, Anjali, what signal was that? So it's my deep privilege to introduce the Vice President of the United States, the Honorable Michael Pence. Are we showing music? introduction that he deserves, I want to remind everybody that in 2003, he was there for us. And in 2008, he stood on the floor and gave one of the most articulate and passionate speeches to ensure that PEPFAR is reauthorized, Vice President of the United States, the Honorable Michael Pence.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Birx, for that kind introduction, and more importantly, I want to say thank you to Ambassador Deborah Birx for a lifetime of leadership, advancing the fight against HIV/AIDS, and since 2014 as the U.S. Global AIDS Coordinator. We are grateful for your leadership. It's made a difference. To my friend, Congressman Chris Smith, to Ambassador Green, to Dr. Fauci, to Michel Sidibe, to distinguished faith and business leaders and honored guests. It is humbling for me to join you all today, just a few days before the 30th Annual World AIDS Day, to mark the 15th anniversary of PEPFAR, the most extraordinary and successful American humanitarian initiative in history. And everyone in this room represents organizations, businesses, and faith-based organizations played a critical role in implementing this extraordinary success and advancing the progress that we have made, not just over the last 15 years, but over the last 30 years, combating HIV and AIDS. And as I begin, let me bring greetings from a friend of mine who is a leader committed to the health and well-being of the American people and has brought new and renewed American commitment to the fight against HIV/AIDS here and around the world. I bring greetings from the 45th President of the United States of America, President Donald Trump. And on behalf of the President and the First Family, welcome to the White House. This Saturday, December 1st, is World AIDS Day. And as the President said on that occasion, just last year, it is a day to remember those who have lost their lives to AIDS. But it's also a day to celebrate the remarkable progress that we've made in combating this disease and to reaffirm our ongoing commitment to end AIDS as a public health threat. And so we gather here today with so many faith communities and organizations that have led the fight against this terrible disease. And it gives me great joy to say that because of your remarkable work, the continued commitment of the American people and the support of leaders in both parties in the Congress of the United States, we are closer today than ever before to ending the AIDS crisis in our time. Good. Now, the credit for this achievement is widely shared, but faith-based organizations and faith communities like those represented here have played a preeminent role. The leaders in this room have inspired countless others to put hands and feet on their faith and bring hope and healing to literally millions of people around the world suffering with HIV/AIDS. It is out of a faith tradition that I share with many in this room. We're commanded that when we're sick, you cared for me. And I want to commend each and every one of you for making that faith real in the battle against HIV/AIDS, to being there for those in need. Thanks to your example, thanks to your generosity, thanks to the efforts that the organizations here have made, not only all across Africa, but all across the wider world. You've rescued a generation from this disease. And every day, one community, one country at a time, we're achieving what once seemed impossible. We are controlling the HIV/AIDS pandemic without a vaccine and without a cure. It is a remarkable testament to your compassion and your efforts. Amazing to think of the progress that we've made. Over the past 37 years, HIV/AIDS has infected more than 77 million people worldwide and claimed no less than 35 million lives, devastating countless families and communities around the world. In response to this health crisis, the American people did as we always do. We mobilized the resources of the nation to fight this epidemic, not just in our own nation, our communities, but ultimately in every corner of the world. Now, America's been on a long journey fighting this disease since it first emerged, and much of the progress that we've made here at home actually began with one young man's story, a boy from my home state of Indiana named Ryan White. Ryan was just 13 years old when he was diagnosed with AIDS. Following a blood transfusion in December of 1984, he was given 6 months to live. His story not only captured the hearts of people across my home state of Indiana, but it captured the attention of the nation and the world. When he returned to school facing his diagnosis in that year, he faced discrimination and a stigma associated with the disease, in part due to the misunderstanding about HIV/AIDS at the time. But Ryan and his mom didn't give up, and Jean White Ginder and her courageous son fought. They fought for his right to go back to school while he was fighting for his life. Ryan's story gained national and international attention. His courage and example, though, helped educate the American people about the realities of HIV/AIDS, and it galvanized the United States Congress to act. In the end, Ryan defied the odds. He would live for another 5 years longer before being laid to rest in the state of Indiana. He passed away in April of 1990, just a month before he was ready to graduate from high school. And only a few months, though, later, the Congress of the United States passed the Ryan White Comprehensive AIDS Resource Emergency Act, and his legacy lives on to this day. As we speak, the Ryan White Care Act continues to provide vital medical services to more than 1.1 million people in the United States living with HIV. And since the days when Ryan White was first diagnosed, we've grown in our understanding of HIV/AIDS and our ability to turn a deadly disease into a manageable and chronic condition. Since those early days, the number of new HIV infections every year in the United States, I'm pleased to report, has fallen by more than 2/3, from 130,000 in 1985 to 50,000 in the year 2010. We've also put feet on our commitment not just to confront HIV/AIDS here in the United States of America, but to fight HIV/AIDS across the wider world. By the start of the 21st century, the United States was spending more than $500 million every year to combat this disease, more than any other nation, but we soon realized it was not nearly enough. Antiretroviral treatments were still too expensive and hard to access. HIV was a death sentence for too many around the world, and it was projected that 100 million people would contract the virus by the end of the first decade of this century. But in 2003, 15 years ago this year, under the leadership of President George W. Bush, and during my and Congressman Smith's tenure in the Congress of the United States, the American people acted to confront the worldwide HIV/AIDS epidemic with American resources and American values. President Bush's call to action resulted in one of the most extraordinary bipartisan achievements of compassion in our time, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, otherwise known as PEPFAR. While serving in Congress, I was on the Foreign Affairs Committee along with Chris, and we worked in a concerted and bipartisan way to help forge legislation that would put the President's vision into reality. I was honored to be a small part of that. I was proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with my colleagues in those days on both sides of the aisle and to support its reauthorization in 2008. Since President Bush signed PEPFAR into law, the United States has devoted more than $80 billion to prevent HIV infections and deliver life-saving treatments to millions. This investment in those around the world suffering with HIV/AIDS is the largest investment by any nation to respond to a single disease in human history. And PEPFAR has not only been the largest investment, it has been inarguably one of the most successful investments in healthcare and humanitarian aid in American history. Thanks to the generosity of the American people and the efforts of the organizations that are so well represented here today. It's humbling to think, in just 15 years, this American effort has helped save more than 17 million lives and prevented millions more from contracting HIV/AIDS to begin with, and AIDS-related deaths have been cut in half since their peak in 2004. Like all of you, this is a cause that's close to the heart of the American people and close to my heart. And standing before you today, I couldn't be more pleased with the timing of our gathering, because just last night, bipartisan majorities in the House and Senate voted to reauthorize PEPFAR, and President Donald Trump will soon sign it into law. We're grateful for the strong and bipartisan support in the Congress for this extraordinary humanitarian effort by the American people. President Trump believes this reauthorization is a critical component of our administration's commitment to combat AIDS, and it will build on the renewed energy and focus that the President has brought and our entire administration have brought to this critical issue. In fact, last year our administration published the first ever strategy for accelerating HIV/AIDS epidemic control, which lays out President Trump's vision and plan to end the AIDS epidemic as we know it. And as the State Department's 2018 PEPFAR strategy progress report shows, under President Trump's leadership, we're building on our past successes. We're reaching new milestones in the battle against this deadly disease. As First Lady Melania Trump saw firsthand in her historic trip across Africa, 4 African nations earlier this year. As of September 2018, PEPFAR today is supporting more than 14.6 million people with life-saving retroviral treatment, compared to 50,000 people receiving such treatments in Africa before 2003. That represents an increase of nearly 3,000% in just 15 years that have access to these life-saving drugs. And thanks to PEPFAR, more than 2.4 million babies of HIV-positive mothers have been born HIV-free. More than 6.8 million orphans, vulnerable children, and their caregivers are surviving and thriving. And over 270,000 healthcare workers have been trained to help save lives in the most vulnerable communities. Today, as many as 13 high-burden nations are on track to control their HIV epidemic by 2020. 11 of the 53 nations that PEPFAR supports are funding a majority of HIV response within their borders. And I want to assure you, our administration will continue to empower ever more countries to mobilize domestic resources to share more of this burden. We will work with our partners together to confront HIV/AIDS around the world. With every nation that brings this epidemic under control, the cost of fighting HIV/AIDS around the world also goes down. Just look at Ethiopia, where PEPFAR assistance has decreased from over $400 million to just $100 million in the last 4 years, as that country has reached the verge of achieving HIV epidemic control. That's what success looks like in the global battle against HIV. And our administration is committed to investing in the organizations and institutions that are making the greatest impact, and we'll continue to work very closely with partners around the region and around the world to accomplish that. That's why today I'm pleased to announce that our administration will invest $100 million in new resources to expand our engagement with faith-based organizations and communities of faith that are on the front lines of the fight against HIV/AIDS. This new investment of $100 million in faith-based organizations will increase the funding to those organizations by a full third, and this will make a world of difference, we believe, in countless lives affected by this disease. The truth is that this is a sound investment because faith-based organizations like those in this room and so many others around the world have been a cornerstone of PEPFAR's success from its very inception. And I remember the debates on Capitol Hill where we ensured that these resources could go to faith-based organizations. From its very inception, it's been these organizations that have made the greatest difference. And it makes sense. In so many communities around the world, it's the faith-based organizations that were already there, already coming alongside vulnerable families and children. And by empowering those faith organizations, we've been able to bring hope and healing to those in need. In the communities that were hit hardest by this epidemic, these organizations have replaced despair with hope. You've provided life-saving medical care. In fact, in some places, faith-based organizations provide up to 70% of healthcare services to people affected by HIV, and PEPFAR provides the resources they need to continue in their works of mercy. It really is an extraordinary testament about the American people's understanding of the role that faith and faith-based organizations play in confronting and meeting the needs of healthcare and poverty around the world. With PEPFAR's support, organizations like those gathered here have been providing HIV testing and counseling, so critical to help people learn their status, prevent the virus from spreading. You educate families about what it means to live with HIV. You provide those infected with antiretroviral treatments so they can lead full and healthy lives. I just want to say, on behalf of President Donald Trump, our administration is proud to partner with faith-based organizations across Africa and around the world as we confront HIV/AIDS. We know, and history teaches, that every dollar we invest in faith-based organizations pays dividends in the fight against this crisis, and your work has made a world of difference. Among the millions of lives that have been saved since PEPFAR was signed into law by our investment and by those of our partners, it's still just one life at a time. I learned of one in particular, and I think as we think about this issue, we ought not to allow ourselves to be caught up in the numbers, because we're talking about people. We're talking about real lives. And as the American people celebrate 15 years of this extraordinary success and accomplishment in PEPFAR, we ought to think about it the way that Americans always do, and that is about its impact on the individual and individual lives. I recently learned one story in particular, a young Kenyan woman named Mercy Millicent. who might not be alive today without the care and compassion she received through the Leo Toto program, one of PEPFAR's longtime partners, the Children of God Relief Institute. Now, Leo Toto means to raise a child in Swahili. Through this program, with the strong support of PEPFAR, the Children of God Relief Institute has helped raise more than 10,000 HIV-positive children to lead healthy, happy lives, including Mercy. Mercy's aunt took her to Leo Toto after she discovered her HIV status following the death of her mother. There, Mercy received medical care she needed, not only to survive, but to thrive. She gained confidence, she gained education, she gained a future. Well, now Mercy's 22, studying at the Kenya Institute of Management. But as she said, quote, "I am who I am because of Leo Toto and PEPFAR." And the American people can be proud of Mercy's story and the role that we played in her story and how it's emblematic of success and hope from despair in the lives of millions. But I'm also pleased to say that we're honored to be joined today by the Executive Director of the Children of God Relief Institute, an organization whose leadership and dedication has helped a generation build a brighter future. Would you join me in thanking Sister Mary Owens and everyone at the Children of God Relief Institute for the difference that you make every day? Thank you, Sister Mary Owens. Thank you for your ministry. Thank you for your example. And let me thank all of you. Thank all of you for being here today, just a few days short of World AIDS Day, as we gather in this moment just to celebrate what the American people and our extraordinary partners have been able to accomplish over the last 15 years. In the dedication that we've all demonstrated in the fight against HIV/AIDS around the world. We've made great progress, but our work is far from over. And as evidenced by the Congress's action and the President's renewed leadership, that work will continue until we end the scourge of HIV/AIDS once and for all. And I believe that day will come. That day will come because I have faith. I have faith in the industry and the ingenuity of brilliant men and women of medicine and science as new therapies are developed. I have faith in the extraordinary commitment of people who've put hands and feet on their faith to come alongside people affected by HIV/AIDS in this country and around the world. I have faith that the American people and this president and our entire administration will continue to see this cause through. And I lastly have that other kind of faith. That faith that commands us to not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we will reap a harvest of blessing if we do not give up. And that, as President Kennedy said so memorably, our greatest blessing, I believe, comes, to paraphrase him, is when we make God's work on this earth our own, which is so surely what the American people did when we committed ourselves to this cause 15 years ago, and we will not grow weary. We will not give up. So help us God. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your work in the ministry. God bless you, and God bless the United States.
All right, we're back in the newsroom with Sue Sheneby and Allison Seymour in the newsroom here after their morning show. Yes. Thank you guys for joining.
And an amazing first ever diaper derby.
Oh, what was that? There were a lot of babies upstairs.
There were so many adorable babies. So Fox 5 Cares is doing this diaper drive with the DC Diaper Bank. I believe that's the technical name. And so we have different locations all across the DMV. So go to our website, fox5dc.com, and see where you can drop off your diapers for families that need diapers. Like, I'm a mom, and it's the essential thing. Do you know what I mean?
That's what she was saying. Food. They were saying like 25 cents a piece or something.
Yes, but that's when you buy it in bulk. Like, but when you go to, and a lot of times in some of in some communities, there is not a big box store. Right. There's not even like the CVS and all this. Right. That type of thing. It's corner stores in some cases, and the prices are high, just like anything else. And
what's the most diapers you ever bought at once?
Oh my God, you have 3. You have 3 babies.
Oh, and I had
did you ever have
two together?
Both are 14 months apart.
Okay. So
then yeah.
We were they were all in pull-ups together because that's what big girls and boys were. I don't know. We used to get the big, huge ones from like Babies R Us or whatever. Yeah,
babies are expensive, man.
Right, and so. Oh, and this was the saddest thing though. That some moms that they talked to said that sometimes they would just leave a baby in a dirty diaper because trying to stretch it, just like anything else. Yeah, and so so that's Fox 5 Cares, and so but today was the diaper derby.
Right. So today was a little fun to kick off the event. And one of the ways to make it fun was to bring in some real babies.
Like 100 of them.
Have them race toward some of us.
They were so cute.
And then run over and actually change the diaper on a fake baby, a baby doll, because obviously you're not going to,
The babies had to do that. I actually missed it.
Yes, the babies had to change the diapers on the baby dolls, Molly.
No, the anchors were in the diaper derby, so you go from one spot to
basically,
another.
you're the baby,
I missed it, actually.
You crawl to us, and then it's just like tag, and then we
and
run
you
over.
do it. So you all were involved.
Well,
no. I was Facebook Living it.
But here's
she was in the corner,
she wasn't in it.
Position, you know what? Very afraid.
We'll ask Molly. So Holly, Wisdom. No. I'm sorry. Wisdom, Maureen, Annie, Tucker, and Aaron.
Aaron.
So Wisdom, Maureen, Tucker, and Aaron. Who do you think the baby has to crawl to them, and then they have to go? They have to change a doll baby diaper, swaddle the baby, and then run back over, and that ends
and
that
tag.
relay. Right. So who do you think
won? You have to swaddle it in the correct way.
Aaron, Maureen, Tucker, Maureen, Wisdom.
Aaron,
I guess Maureen.
You go with Maureen.
She had a baby.
Yeah.
Wisdom does too, but he's, I don't know.
Wisdom.
He won.
He won the whole
far and away.
Yeah.
Wait, wrapping the.
Destroyed the competition.
Yes.
Well, was his baby faster?
Yes, that was the key.
Who threw Aaron's baby?
So
Maureen was bad sport.
The doll.
Why?
The doll. I thought that Aaron threw the doll on the floor.
She wanted to win, and she'll do anything
to Aaron says, that Maureen actually tossed Aaron's baby doll on the floor.
Oh my goodness.
To try to make up time.
I was there to pick the baby up off. This is the fake baby, the doll baby.
The doll.
Off of the floor.
And gave a little kiss on the forehead, which I thought was a nice touch.
You did.
No, I didn't do that. Anyway, so give diapers. Fox 5.
That's amazing. So Wisdom won. Was he so proud of that? Was he talking about it
a little tiara
all day?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's a fun event.
We have to call him King Wisdom now for the rest of the week.
Good.
Oh, just the week? He told me 2 weeks.
Well,
Anyway, so that was a good day today. It was a lot of fun.
good. Yeah.
Fun for a good cause.
Yeah, totally. And in some serious news too, we just had a little bit of breaking news about Michael Cohen, Trump's former lawyer, pleading guilty to lying about the Russia investigation. Trump had a few words before he got on Marine One to depart for the G20 summit in Argentina, which we have, and we'll play it out for you later. But do you know anything more about this? Were you kind of just tweeting about it?
Well, I think it's just, well, I tweeted out the full statement, which you said you'll play it later.
Yeah.
The full statement that the president made afterward, but essentially calling Michael Cohen weak, for testifying, for lying under oath, which is what he pled guilty to.
Right.
So the president says he's weak, and people say, well, then why did you have him as your attorney? Why did you bring him on board in the first place? And he said, well, the guy did a favor for me a long time ago. So that was his rationale for bringing Michael Cohen on board. There's also questions, obviously, about the business involvements in Russia, because if you look, the president had tweets from 2016, 2017 saying he had no business ventures in Russia, and now he's saying, well, it was an idea for a business venture, and we talked about the idea of putting a hotel there, but since we decided not to do the project, then it didn't really count as a business venture that was there, even though we were negotiating essentially for a deal that he says didn't go through. So it seems like a lot of walk back on a lot of things, but as with a lot of things these days, it's hard to see where the truth lies in between the versions that we're being told.
And what's going to happen from all this? There's been so many things and just sort of progressing, and nothing's really.
I feel like nothing.
It's a big question.
Materializing.
Nothing really.
I think that this joint defense, scenario that came out yesterday is a little more troubling, because that's showing essentially that information was shared between the probe and the White House. So then you have to wonder how much that might play a role in things, but the special counsel's played most things pretty close to the vest. But there are two camps. There are those that say he's waiting to drop a bombshell, and then there are those who are saying if he had a bombshell, he would have dropped it a long time ago. And that this is really just a lot that's building up to something that is not going to be there. And I think that's the angle that the president seizes on, because I think that a lot of his modus operandi from the start has been try to talk something down before it comes up. Yeah. Which is why you see all the tweets even today. Before Cohen pled guilty, you saw several tweets overnight
from the president.
From the president once again saying this whole thing is
what about the question?
Questionable, and then it comes out. So it's kind of like produce the doubt first, plant the doubt seed, and then maybe people will buy into it at a lesser level. But again, none of that information, none of the proof is out there, and maybe it never will be. So
what about the timing, though, with the sort of conversation about Paul Manafort maybe being pardoned?
Still there?
Yeah. I personally feel like that would not be a good... I feel like it's all too close. I don't know. That's just me. As an American citizen, I feel like I would like to... I hope that the president does not pardon. It would just seem all too close, and I
think it would be.
I think it would set a bad precedent.
In layman's terms, the ultimate "I'm the boss" move.
Yeah.
But like a lot of things in Washington these days, it really comes down to what does Congress do about it.
Right. That's true.
You have hundreds of voices there that can make change, and if things are allowed to continue in certain fashions, and nobody stands up and speaks out or says anything about it, then things are going to continue. So, it's. I think that we're kind of past the point where public perception really matters anymore.
That's what I meant when I said I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters. So anyway, lots of news coming out of the White House today.
I love coming in.
That's what we talk about. It gives us something to talk about every day.
Right.
And I actually hadn't heard the president what he had to say about it, Molly, afterwards. So
we can. We can play it out.
Okay.
Let's play out a little bit of it. Why not?
I guess you'll have to put it into legal terms, but he was convicted with a fairly long-term sentence on things totally unrelated to the Trump organization, having to do with mortgages and having to do with cheating the IRS, perhaps, a lot of different things. I don't know exactly, but he was convicted of various things unrelated to us. He was given a fairly long jail sentence, and he's a weak person. And by being weak, unlike other people that you watch, he's a weak person, and what he's trying to do is get a reduced sentence. So he's lying about a project that everybody knew about. I mean, we were very open with it. We were thinking about building a building. I guess we had in a form, it was an option. I don't know what you'd call it. I decided ultimately not to do it. There would have been nothing wrong if I did do it. If I did do it, there would have been nothing wrong. That was my business. So he's lying very simply to get a reduced sentence, okay?
All right, so that was his piece of his statement from this morning.
That's part of it, yeah. I tweeted out the whole statement. Look, you got a couple things going on there. Again, this goes back to the question of were there business interests in Russia involving the president's companies. None of us can speak for the president, but if I'm owning the company, I know exactly what my business dealings are when it comes to international business. So, I think that a lot of the questions of perception when it comes to what the president says a lot were shown right there because you're not presenting things definitively with fact. It's well, he did this. Well, I don't know. Maybe he did it. Maybe he didn't. And every time you do that, what it does is it throws that doubt into everybody else's minds as to, oh, maybe he did do it. Right. And then what we see is in the various coverage of this, then you see people that grasp on both sides of the opportunity. Oh, maybe he did do this, or oh, maybe he did this. And suddenly you have two different angles coming at the same thought of one saying, maybe he did this, it's wrong. Or maybe he did this, it's okay. You know what I mean? For the same statement. So as long as he's able to cast that doubt, then it continues the arguments behind the scenes of what really happened. Instead of just coming out and saying, this is what happened in a definitive type of way, or this is what didn't happen.
Lying, I don't know about it, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll have to see what else comes of this and what type of video we have coming in from this summit, of course, in Argentina, which is coming up next. So
I'm playing right now, actually.
Yeah.
Heading down to Argentina. So,
yeah.
Which, of course, considering that.
And he's going to meet with Putin on the weekend, right?
Well,
he canceled it, right? Or he pushed it? I thought
supposedly it's off.
That's what I saw in the breaking news, but I don't know.
Oh, okay.
These kind of things in these meetings can be off, as in the official sit-down schedule meeting is off, but there could always be a, hey Al, we got a
let's
second,
meet up.
Right.
So you never know what's going to happen.
Outside the Kremlin.
Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit. This morning, Steve, you did an awesome interview with a producer of a new series, a special that's coming out in December on the Smithsonian Channel, about a little bit of flashback in history, the DC Snipers, which was 16 years ago, 2002, in October, pretty much spanned the whole month of October. You guys probably remember that really well.
Oh my gosh.
And you're in journalism probably.
9/11. It was like bam, bam.
Yeah, exactly, right.
Yeah, and so just when you're like trying to get it going again and trying to feel like a human being again,
you're right.
Then that happened locally. Of course, became a huge national story. It was so unnerving because you could be like the thought that you could be walking in a strip mall, or one of the shootings happened right near my parents' home, right off of Georgia Avenue, right at the Maryland-DC line, and there's a plaque right there right now. I cannot go by it without thinking of it.
That is the one. Okay, so this case, I remember really well too. It was actually during my 16th birthday, so of course I remember it. And one of the shootings was on my birthday, and later I got like really obsessed. When you go down those rabbit holes, obsessed with old cases. So I started reading into everything, and the one person that died in DC, in the DC lines, was in Georgia Avenue. And one of our photojournalists, actually, Joe Spivak, has many people here, close connection to checking out one of those white box trucks, making sure the police had already tagged it, running away from the scene, and then later the sniper hitting that same spot. Like, he has this fascinating, I wish he were here to tell it. He tells it so well, his story about covering this, and he was like in his, late 20s, whatever, like a young, journalist. And I'm sure some of the stories coming out of here, you were in this market, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you were here.
Definitely here. And, going out to, I forget what, it was like you would just be sent to these different locations. I don't
check
even
it out.
Like, why at that
like
point.
A Shoppers, a Michael's.
I went to a high school, and then you'd go to someplace else. It was just a time where you, for the first time, this could happen to me. I'm covering this, but it could also happen to me. So no joke, you're getting gas and you're sort of back in your car. You're super, because a lot of them happen. Gas. Was it a lot? Now it was
gas stations, convenience stores.
And then just to when it really got you was when it was like connected to that school. Do you remember? Like, and they thought they were just
yes. But I read all about this recently because I was obsessed with it.
But the kicker is how foreign that was then. We've seen so many school shootings, and I guess Columbine was a little bit before that.
99.
Like yeah. But still, it wasn't like if we oh my God forbid, if we heard that coming in today, we'd be like, not again. But back then, it was like the thought of some person picking kids off.
I know.
Was like.
Bus stops, on a bus was one of them.
And then they put a note out that said something
the
like
tarot card. Oh my gosh, it's like a movie. It's horrible. And later I met friends in college who grew up here, and they were at sports practices, like you were mentioning, Tucker was talking about this. They were instructed by their coaches to run zigzag to the water fountains and protect themselves.
This is a crazy way
of living.
Right.
The evil genius of it. Was that when you looked at the pattern, and after this all came full circle and you realized why he was doing this, it really was a way to send as many people as possible just into that mode of paranoia. When you have
true definition of terror.
One at a gas station, you're like, okay, I'm not going to get gas. And then something at school, like, what about my kids at a bus stop? I can't take the bus. At a Home Depot, I can't go to the store. So it was just one thing after another of literally, like, you found something in everybody's life that they would do on a daily basis that would just paralyze the entire region.
Right, exactly.
And really, as it unfolds, it is even more and more riveting. I think that's why I think this special that we're going to show you this interview about is interesting, because their goal was to really recruit a ton of young people to create this mass terror across the nation. So they did hit, they ended up killing 10 people here, but it was also sort of a more widespread thought behind it.
Yeah, it was terrible.
So
it was, and now looking back, it feels like we were so much more innocent then.
I know, a year after 9/11.
We are today as a nation.
Right. So the special, and this guy was really interesting, shows just a lot of like never before heard audio and stuff like that.
There was some. Obviously, there's some 911 calls which are a little difficult, I think, to listen to for a lot of people.
Difficult for me to hear.
On this today,
But they definitely have some 911 calls that were not made public before, but also some video, some of the police video, some of the FBI video that they had when they first found the car, etc., and they first realized how they were using the trunk of the car,
which is so interesting.
So it's a lot of it is things that we later learned through the testimony and the court process playing out, but it's a chance to see that part of it for the first time. So I think it's a little tough for the DC area 16 years later, but at the same time, you have to understand Smithsonian is putting this on for the entire country, the world to see, so that it just kind of demonstrates what we went through here.
I was recently getting obsessed with this whole story, and I told my parents a little more about Joe's account, which was so fascinating. You have to talk to him. And my father used to come down to work in Beltsville, Maryland, and he told me it was during those 23 days, and he would get gas with his colleagues and literally creep around the gas station, try to hide behind things. And I was like, I can't believe you were down here during that. I mean, I was a teenager. I totally forgot that he was doing those trips. And anyway, just sort of a personal note of it. But yeah, okay.
Montgomery County area. It was 2002 when John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo were arrested, tried, and later convicted for their 3-week rampage. They'd killed 10 people and left 3 injured. Well, now a Smithsonian Channel series is gearing up to retell the story using rare audio, never before broadcast 911 calls, police dash camera footage, and more. Here's a preview.
481. I will need a unit with crime scene. We got a major crime scene with the video shot. Fire an ambulance?
Yes, I need an ambulance and police at Major World Plaza at the end by the post office.
Well, it brings back a lot of memories to so many people. It was a clip from the Smithsonian Channel series, The Lost Tapes, and the series transports viewers back in time to relive iconic moments in American history. Season 2 kicked off last week with Apollo 13, and this week's episode will focus on the D.C. sniper. But first, series executive producer Charles Poe joins us this morning to talk about it. Charles, thanks for coming in today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Why focus on this particular case? You have obviously you have a national audience. You have iconic moments in history all over the country, all around the world. Why focus on this?
Well, as Tom Brokaw says in the film, this was one of the most intense and complicated manhunts in American history. And the Lost Tape series focuses on events that have changed American history. And what we're doing is we're plunging viewers back into those stories and enabling them to experience it as it happened, using only archive materials that were captured at the time.
So what do we have that's new? What haven't we heard before, seen before?
Well, we did go back and find all the 911 recordings, which were amazing on their own. There was also, you forget that obviously the law enforcement were also rolling tape. And one of the things that I found most fascinating is once they actually captured the snipers, the FBI recorded themselves sort of reconstructing inside the car how the snipers had set up, how they shot, how they set through the trunk and through the hole in the trunk by the license plate. So that material hadn't been seen before.
So that's all seen from the law enforcement perspective as to how they might go ahead and put their case together, which we know was a successful case in prosecution in both cases.
Absolutely.
What do you think? What do you think the national draw is here? Obviously, here in the D.C. region, we know, people were here, they relived this, they may see flashbacks to those fears of not being able to get out of a car just to put gas in your car. Or as Tucker said earlier, he was playing soccer at the time and you always had one eye over your shoulder as to what might happen. So I think people here get it. They understand what that fear was. What about on the national stage?
Well, look, I think it's a story that to some degree has been underplayed nationally because it was such a local, the DC metro area for 23 days had the psychological fear of it could happen anytime to anyone. It was a national story at the time. We tend to forget that these events have an impact well beyond sort of the locality. We're almost in this age of mass shootings happening now. We're almost inured to it. And yet there were a lot of lessons that came out of this story. When you look back from this remove, the way that the law enforcement worked together, the way that the media reported the story, all these things have changed. And so some of the lessons that you can see in following this story still apply today.
And that's one of the things I was going to ask, because obviously with any big story there's praise and there's criticism. Hindsight always 20/20, looking back at the way things were handled. How do you kind of cover that aspect of the story? And what do we learn after we see it? Or are we looking at the good and the bad as to how things were handled?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that people may remember is that one of the strategic mistakes that the law enforcement made was announcing that they thought that the suspects were using a white van or a white box truck.
Shut down every highway in the DC region.
Exactly. And one of the things that you learn in the course of watching the film is that was a big strategic mistake, bigger than we thought, because there were over 100,000 registered white vans. It's one of the most common vehicles on the road. So not only did that have law enforcement looking in the wrong direction, but also the tip line. Suddenly you have these common vehicles out there. There were 2,600 calls a day coming into the tip line. And most of those were involving the absolute wrong vehicle. It was a blue Chevy Caprice, which we know now is a much more distinctive car, obviously, than the common one that they had announced. So you'd like to believe that in looking back on this story, those kind of mistakes wouldn't happen again.
We were just talking internally about this among so many people here who covered the stories and lived through those moments in Washington, D.C. region history. And a lot of people, quite honestly, you pass the car dealerships or you pass the bus stops, the places where these shootings happened, and you still think about it all these years later. I'm curious what people that you talked to had to say about that and the lasting impact that this had.
Well, I'll say that is a different documentary than this series. This series really uses only extant archive from the time. We did not go back and do interviews. We don't have experts telling you what to think. The goal of this series is to relive history as it was reported and as it unfolded in real time. So we did not go back and talk to, there were three survivors of the 10 were killed and 3 survived. We didn't go back and interview them or interview law enforcement. That's not the sort of the goal of this. We consider the Lost Tape series its primary source history. So it's pure, unfiltered, telling the story and let you, exactly, as it happened.
Yeah. Where can folks watch it? Easiest way to be able to see all your hard work?
On Smithsonian Channel this Sunday night, 9 p.m.
All right, we'll look forward to it. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much.
Best wishes with the future episodes as well. Thank you guys.
All right.
It's really a really cool concept by Smithsonian Channel to do that, to play it back. And, I know you were talking when you were here. I was actually just about to move to DC and literally weighing my options as to whether I wanted to come here. And I had family here at the time and was hearing all the play-by-play from them about, hiding behind the running out of the car to get gas and running back inside.
Yeah, that is so scary.
But, I ended up coming anyway, and then I ended up actually going down to Virginia Beach to cover the trial of John Muhammad.
Oh, you did?
Literally sitting behind him when he was convicted.
Yeah.
And, that it literally was some of the first stories that I covered here was going back to the bus stop, to other places where, to talk to the families of these people who had died, because at that point it was just a few months earlier.
And so have we said with like 100%, not accuracy, but in 100% conclusion that it was all a ruse to cover up the killing of his wife?
No, he didn't kill his wife. He wanted to kill his wife.
So her name is Mildred Muhammad, right? And so she's written a couple of books. She's been in talking about that it was all to sort of, scramble
eventually
and
to
basically so he could essentially snipe her and
get away with it because she.
I read that.
And it wouldn't stand out because so many other people had died. Lee Boyd Malvo, by the way, is still in Southern Virginia, in jail. There has been some talk. He's been trying to get a new trial, but to this point, that has not materialized.
That's probably a controversial thing, and I understand. Believe me, but I do think he was a minor at the time.
Yeah,
right?
17 or something. Right?
Looking for this father figure. You have this evil older person, and I do believe that he was under his influence and without a way to get out at us, or brainwashed or whatever. So I would not be. He spent all these years in prison. I would actually like to see him get a trial on his own.
I don't know that the result would be any different, though.
Probably not, but
okay.
I see what you're saying.
That's okay, right? But he admitted to doing it, but he had like this person, his father figure, who set him up to do that, so that he would take the fall.
Which I think led in part to the most severe sentence you could have for John Allen Muhammad, because he not only orchestrated the murders of so many people, but he corrupted that other person to take part in it as well.
But how scary would that be if the outcome of that retrial was something different? That would be scary.
I feel like, I have a person who is going to be 17 in February. I feel like you're very impressionable, especially if you're like lacking something. If you got a smooth talker, goodness knows it happens to lots of young girls too, but in different ways. But you've got somebody who's a master manipulator. Now, did this kid have a way to like, when he was out, like run away and just run and try to get help? He was probably afraid to do that. I don't know. I've never been under the influence of someone.
Here's the thing too, is
just bringing up some points.
Right.
If you had a retrial, and remember these trials were held in southeastern Virginia to get away from the publicity. Not that you could mask it, but to get away from the publicity. If you had that retrial and you have to have that in Prince William County, or you have to have that in Montgomery County, I think it's going to be very, very hard to make that point to a jury who still knows everything about, that point that unfortunately you had, the loss of life.
Oh yeah.
But you think about the millions of people who were paralyzed for that time period, who it literally impacted every life in the DMV.
Right. No, it was really scary. Did they specifically try them in Virginia so that the death penalty was on the table? I think that was part of it. Did you cover that when
well, I don't think the death penalty was ever an option for Lee Boyd Malvo.
Not for him. I guess I mean in general for the other.
But there were multiple trials that could have proceeded. Maryland was ready to go. If Virginia, for John Allen Muhammad, if he would not have been convicted in Virginia, he would have immediately gone to trial in Maryland. So either way, the conviction even in Maryland would have been life without parole. So they were, at the time of the prosecution, every jurisdiction that was part of a victim was ready to go.
Oh yeah, crazy.
Really terrible time.
Yeah.
And on that note, Molly, it's been great talking to you today.
Yeah, thank you guys really for your contributions today. And we're glad to have Alice and Steve back. So
hopefully something a little more upbeat for a Friday.
Yeah, it'll be Friday, so that's great.
We'll start at a win.
Yep.
Okay, we'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, guys.
And we'll see you bright and early at 6 a.m.
Oh yeah.
Manafort is under intense pressure right now, and he does face years in prison. Democrats say he is counting on a pardon, and the president may be willing to grant him one.
3, 2, 1.
A festive night at the White House as the president and first lady lit the national Christmas tree. But it capped off a controversial day, with the president again railing on special counsel Robert Mueller and the ongoing Russia probe. At the center of it all, former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort. Mueller has accused him of lying, and he faces a lengthy prison sentence. Is a presidential pardon in his future? The president told the New York Post, "It was never discussed, but I wouldn't take it off the table." Why would I take it off the table? Now, Democrats immediately accused the president of dangling a pardon to encourage Manafort to stonewall Mueller.
I think a pardon would provoke a firestorm here. It would be solid evidence of obstruction of justice. And I think that's Manafort's bet.
Democrats and a single Republican again tried to move a measure in the Senate yesterday to protect Mueller from being fired. And again, that effort failed. As for Manafort, no one really disputes that the president could pardon him. Executive pardon powers are very broad, but they are limited in one important aspect. They only apply to federal crimes, and Manafort would still face a number of state charges.
They're in New Jersey, Virginia, New York, and California, states controlled by the Democratic Party, and the president's pardon power does not extend to state crimes.
And we'll get a better idea, perhaps, of where the Manafort situation stands tomorrow. A federal judge is going to hear from both sides to see where this case is headed. In Washington, Doug Luzader, Fox News.
We are absolutely devastated.
It was a grim discovery for a North Carolina town, as authorities preliminarily identify a body discovered in the woods Wednesday as that missing 13-year-old Hanya Aguilar.
Preliminary tests case the body that they found is Hanya's.
Tuesday afternoon, after a more than 3-week search, investigators followed a lead to a wooded area, about 10 miles from her home where she was abducted the morning of November 5th. That's when her body was found in the water.
I wish we had a different outcome for Hanya's family, for the community that she lived in.
Police say the morning of her kidnapping, Hanya was forced into her family's SUV. A witness recalled seeing a man in all black wearing a yellow bandana grab the teen. The abandoned vehicle was located days later, several miles from her home, and her body discovered just a few miles from there. Authorities are being tight-lipped about the condition of the body. Hanya's cause of death is pending an autopsy. Although investigators do believe the body is hers, they are awaiting final determination using dental records.
It's hard. She's 13. You know, she's a baby.
A $30,000 reward is being offered for information leading to an arrest. In Washington, Ray Bogan, Fox News. Wednesday, senators heard from 2 of President Trump's top cabinet members, but not from CIA Director Gina Haspel. It's reported the CIA has linked the Saudi crown prince to the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Now, senators are growing more and more frustrated that the White House is sticking with Saudi Arabia.
We have no smoking gun.
Defense Secretary James Mattis and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo were both on Capitol Hill Wednesday discussing with senators U.S. intelligence on Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's involvement in Khashoggi's murder.
There is no direct reporting connecting the Crown Prince to the order to murder Jamal Khashoggi. And that's all I can say in an unclassified setting.
But that wasn't good enough for senators on both sides of the aisle who were frustrated Haspel was absent.
It's outrageous that the Senate can be stonewalled from hearing from the CIA director.
It was inadequate because the CIA was not there.
Senators took their frustration to the Senate floor. After the briefing, they voted 63 to 37 to move a joint resolution forward that would direct President Trump to remove U.S. armed forces from the conflict in Yemen. The U.S. has been helping a Saudi-led coalition to defeat the rebel forces that took over Yemen's government in 2015.
It is imperative today that the United States Senate tell Saudi Arabia and tell the world that we are not going to be continuing to be part of that humanitarian disaster.
The Senate is planning another vote on the resolution next week. If they pass it, the House would need to do the same. But House Republicans have tried to block a similar plan in the past. In Washington, Ray Bogan, Fox News.
New York Governor Andrew Cuomo calls it the most critical infrastructure issue in the entire Northeast, replacing the century-old rail tunnels beneath the Hudson River.
If you lose service of one of these tunnels for 1, 2, or 3 days, you're talking about a devastating impact on transportation in the whole Northeast corridor.
The existing tunnel was already showing its age, but then Superstorm Sandy hit, flooding it with salt water, and that salt is still sitting on the cement, decomposing one of the most critical arteries into the nation's largest city and President Trump's hometown.
We want to make sure that the president understands the severity of the damage.
But this year, the Trump administration denied funding for its replacement, the proposed Gateway Tunnel. So today, Governor Cuomo came to Washington to try to convince President Trump in person to help build it before it's too late.
I think it's fair to say that the president was receptive to what we were talking about.
If they strike a deal, it would be a rare display of bipartisanship between two brash native New Yorkers who've traded barbs repeatedly over the last 2 years. It would also give real credence to the hope that infrastructure may be one issue where Republicans and Democrats might actually be able to work together when the new Congress comes in.
It really could be a beautiful bipartisan type of situation. Maybe we'll make a deal, maybe we won't. That's possible. But we have a lot of things in common on infrastructure.
We Democrats believe in a real infrastructure bill with real direct and robust federal investments that will rebuild our crumbling roads and bridges.
And when it comes to building these new tunnels, there's been a lot of talk that perhaps funding for them would be tied to the president's border wall. But tonight, Governor Cuomo told Democrats on Capitol Hill, don't do it. It's a bad deal. He said, quote, I would not trade anything for a wall. At the White House, Kristen Fisher, Fox News.
I'm able to leave within a couple of hours, actually.
Keith Daggett understands the risks that come with where he lives.
This being a coastal flood zone, I think that's to be expected, that occasionally there will be a flood.
Behind his home is the London Avenue Canal. The levee breached during Hurricane Katrina, but Tulane University environmental science professor Alex Kolker says there's another danger here.
The neighborhood lies 8 to 10 feet below the canal, and that's an enormous flood risk.
Parts of New Orleans are sinking. The Gentilly neighborhood where Daggett lives is sinking faster than others. Kolker is working with a team of experts to figure out what parts are sinking, how fast, and why. They have some theories.
There's a whole bunch of old swamps beneath the city of New Orleans, and when these swamps dry out, the ground, they compact and compress, and the ground above them sinks.
The city received a $141 million federal grant to get some answers and improve its resiliency. The project has even crossed international lines, with Dutch-based company Deltares coming in to help.
The city, for example, is trying in neighborhoods like this to store water underground and to pump out water less quickly, on the hopes that by doing so, the rate at which the old marshes and swamps dry out will slow down.
Researchers hope the project can serve as a model for neighborhoods throughout the country, especially those in the Gulf Coast region, where major hurricanes are an annual threat.
Knowing that they are at least addressing the problem to whatever degree does give me some comfort.
Deltares will return in January to do more research. The entire study will take about 18 months. In New Orleans, Madeline Rivera, Fox News.
So Hermes came off the track as Winto Liley.
Politics have turned personal for Maurice Mizrahi.
He raced from the time he was 2, like most dogs, till 4.5 when he was put into the adoption system.
After Florida voters decided to ban greyhound racing by 2021, leaving more than an estimated 7,000 dogs in need of new homes. Over 100 adoption groups across the The country are prepared to take in the retired racing dogs, but there's a growing debate over who has a say in their futures.
It's the owners of the dogs. They will tell us if they would like the dog back either for breeding or if they want to have it for a pet for themselves, or if it's okay for us to contact an approved adoption group.
Some pro-racing activists say groups which supported a ban shouldn't have a say in where the dogs go. Amendment 13 passed with nearly 70% support, hitting an industry already in decline, with more than 50 tracks closing nationally over the past 30 years.
It will have an effect on it. People will have to change their business models.
Florida is home to 11 of the nation's 17 dog tracks, more than any other state.
When we got her, she couldn't move her back end at all.
Sonia Straitman has helped over 2,000 greyhounds find homes over the past 15 years.
Mass breeding is going to end. The injuries are going to end. The deaths are going to end. This is the best thing that's happened for the breed in years.
While the future of the industry is up for debate, both sides agree that the future well-being of the dogs should come first.
Yes, he could run 45 miles an hour, but they're dogs. People get it. Floridians can.
All right, you ready? Okay.
Because greyhound racing won't be illegal in the Sunshine State for another 25 months, some tracks plan to keep racing up until the 2020 deadline, while others have already called it quits. In Palm Beach, Florida, Ali Rafa, Fox News.
And now, a minor incident in the Black Sea, and they impose martial law in the country, Putin said. It is clearly done because of the upcoming election. Putin's comments came just hours after the Russian military announced it would deploy a new S-400 surface-to-air missile system in Crimea next month. The system, capable of tracking and shooting down targets 250 miles away, to be moved into place as the war drums continue to sound in Eastern Europe, following the capture of 24 Ukrainian sailors by Russian forces on Sunday. In the past 48 hours, all 24 Ukrainian sailors have been ordered by Russian courts to jail for the next 2 months, pending trial. In Ukraine, President Petro Poroshenko, wearing combat fatigues, visited troops Wednesday who are training for future ground operations should they be needed in the country's eastern part. We have to improve our skills. We have to provide effective training to be ready in case it is needed, Poroshenko said, and for the enemy to lose and to pay its irresponsible decision to invade Ukraine. According to Poroshenko, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo offered Ukraine military assistance this week in preparation for a larger conflict with Russia. Pompeo joins U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis in placing the blame on Russia for starting the recent provocation.
When you think that there is a treaty between the two countries that permits exactly what happened, it just shows that Russia cannot be counted on right now to keep its word.
The Kremlin tells Fox News that President Trump and President Putin are still scheduled to meet on the sidelines of the G20 summit this weekend, despite Trump's threats to cancel, as the situation on the ground in Ukraine inches closer to a military confrontation. In Jerusalem, Trey Yingst, Fox News.
Chaos continues at the border. Dozens of migrants were arrested over the weekend following a clash with Border Patrol agents, including one man in the caravan who was caught entering illegally. Turns out he was a member of the international crime gang MS-13. The arrest coming just days after President Trump called many of the migrants stone-cold criminals. Meanwhile, the number of those seeking asylum swelling to an historic high, which is straining Customs and Border Patrol resources.
They are applying for asylum and their children and families, and our processes, procedures, and infrastructure were not built for that at this level.
With such high volumes and long processing times, some say they're now seeking other options, including staying in Mexico.
I wanted to go to the United States, but for the time being, I don't think anyone can. So it's better to find a job here.
But the more time the migrants spend camped at the border, the more health and hygiene become serious concerns.
Epidemics happen in conditions such as this.
It can take up to 6 months for the asylum claims to be processed, and authorities say they're working as fast as possible to get through all of the applications. Authorities have questioned the 29-year-old gang member who was arrested. He will be held pending his processing and repatriation to Honduras. In Los Angeles, Anita Vogel, Fox News.
a 5-piece comforter for my bed.
164 million people did some shopping between Thanksgiving and Cyber Monday.
I just bought a microwave that has smart home function.
A strong start to the holiday season, the National Retail Federation says, but down some 9 million from last year. The average shopper also spent about $20 less this year. Retail analysts say stores are extending their promotional sales, hoping to keep shoppers around even longer.
I feel that we've done a good job as a company and as a team to get a lot more focus this year than what we were last year.
Companies have been pouring money into their virtual real estate, a move that helped accommodate a big jump in spending online. Online shopping up 28% this year. Black Friday setting a new record. Add in Saturday and Sunday, and it was a record-breaking weekend. On Cyber Monday, shoppers dropped almost $8 billion on merchandise, according to Adobe Analytics. All welcomed news for a sector that's had a turbulent year.
We've seen actually retail sales do well, especially when they came out today, lending credence to what we've seen from some of the strongest retailers.
The forecast is rosy for the weeks to come of the 10 busiest shopping days of the year, and there are more days between Thanksgiving and Christmas this year. Time for procrastinators to buy an estimated $30 billion in gift cards, the bulk of them to restaurants and department stores. Matt Napolitano, Fox News.
With the touch of a screen, people around the world can spread the holiday spirit.
This is a concrete way that parents and families can come teach the rising generation this is how we care for each other.
These people may look like they're window shopping, but it's not for what you may think.
And this one here, this candy bar, is a donation to give a child an eye examination.
It's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Light the World campaign, and this unique vending device is a giving machine, one of 5 around the world.
There's one outside the Hyde Park Chapel in London. There's one outside the Manhattan Temple in New York City. Gilbert, Arizona at the Water Tower, and then here in the Joseph Smith Building lobby.
People are able to purchase a variety of items from a soccer ball to livestock to donate through local and global partner charities.
Through those endeavors last year, over 282,000 meals were able to be accumulated through this donation process and serve the folks here in the state of Utah.
And she had tears in her eyes. She said, I couldn't do this for my child, but now you're giving my child an eye exam and glasses. He'll be able to see the teacher, be able to read a book.
Representatives say this instant act of service is better than the instant gratification of any vending machine candy bar.
When you come here and you purchase something from these vending machines, you get an internal kind of satisfaction of knowing you helped someone else that needed your help and made a difference.
The machines will be available through the Christmas season. The church is covering the back end of these donations, so 100% of what you donate goes to buy these items or similar items, depending on what the families need. In Salt Lake City, Amanda Gary, Fox 13 News, Utah.
When the last ladder's been stowed and the last light bulb checked, that's when the crowd starts to gather at Walter Hazard's house, who swears his last name isn't Griswold.
It could be.
For the official kickoff of Christmas. 10, 9, hundreds of hours.
I don't even like to count anymore because I know it's going to take me forever.
7, 6. Tens of thousands of lights.
Okay, is everything going to work?
Come down.
4,
3. To this moment.
2, 1.
Or maybe this one. You see, around town, this display is known as the gingerbread house.
You literally use thousands of staples, like 6,000 or 7,000 staples.
He started 8 or 9 years ago with a few strands of lights, and it's evolved into a full-fledged spectacle.
My wife says it's too much. It's too much every year, and it's never too much for me.
Same goes for the crowd. And for as much electricity running across the house,
it's really expensive. It's 3 or 4 times as much.
It's equally electric outside.
Red-nosed reindeer, you'll go down in history like George Washington.
It's worth every penny.
Because he says the looks on those faces,
it's the kids. It's always been about the kids.
Are priceless.
It's my gift to them.
We are at the central location of the Denver Public Library.
Now, I can't tell you how many books actually exist inside the library, but I can tell you a bunch of people visit it each year.
1.2 million.
That's right, 1.2 million people, like Shep Austin here.
I go to a library about once a week.
And guess what? He's a millennial.
I am, in fact, yeah.
Makes sense, according to that new Pew study, showing a huge number of millennials are using public libraries more and more.
The study shows that 53% of those aged between 18 to 35 used a public library in the last 12 months. That's compared to 45% of Gen Xers and 43% of baby boomers.
They're a way that your city takes care of the foundation of knowledge within the community.
The Denver Public Library says it's seen an uptick in millennials thanks in part to expanding its services, like providing passes to museums and allowing folks to check out GoPros and projectors. They also aim certain events at that demographic.
So we're doing events at breweries. We have one at Ratio, Declaration Brewing. So just a way to kind of connect over books for folks that are in our age group.
Thing is, libraries are great for folks of all ages. Always have been and always will. That's the nice thing.
I think it's just a fun way to continue to connect over books and reading.
In Denver, this is Kevin Torres, Fox 31.
From the estate of Playboy founder Hugh Hefner comes hundreds of iconic items up for auction.
What we have here is the contents of the Playboy mansion. Many of the items, not just part of his personal, but part of his professional life.
Few have been invited to the famed mansion, but millions have heard the tales of the wild parties and the liberal lifestyle lived and preached by Hefner.
We have some of his robes that he wore. We have some of his slippers, pipes, a lot of the trademark things. We have a lot of items that were back by the grotto, items that were in the backyard. So if you went to a Playboy Mansion party, these are items that, you would see. So if these items could talk, they'd tell a lot of stories.
Here we have Hef's typewriter. And with this auction open to the public, the interest level is expected to be global.
His items will bring a premium. We have a lot of bidders from all over the world, China, Japan, Russia, registering to bid for the auction. But everybody wants a piece of Hef.
Joy Piazza, Fox News.
And, it'll still be a cool afternoon. Definitely.
All right, well, we are finally back in the newsroom here on this Thursday, November 29th. We're glad that you're with us, and we're trying to trace and track all of the latest news and live events that we have coming into our newsroom right now. I do want to show you this video from this morning. If you remember the case in New Jersey, in Colts Neck, New Jersey, it was a mansion fire murder having to do with two brothers. Authorities announced charges this morning against the brother of a man whose body was found in this mansion, and it was found along with his wife and children in their New Jersey mansion there near the shore, and it was set on fire. They decided ultimately that this was a domestic thing, and it was brother against brother, and there are some more pretty harrowing details to this case. But this morning, the authorities in Monmouth County in Freehold, New Jersey, spoke more about this case and what they're going to be doing about it. It's pretty interesting stuff. Listen in.
Serve with those charges while he's detained at the Monmouth County Correctional Institute here in Freehold. We have charged Defendant Canero with 4 counts of murder, 1 count of aggravated arson, 1 count of possession of a firearm for an unlawful purpose, and 1 count of possession of a knife for an unlawful purpose. These charges that were filed this morning are in addition to the charge that was filed last week out of Ocean Township for the alleged aggravated arson of the defendant's own home. And by filing these charges, the state alleges that the defendant murdered his brother Keith Canero and Keith's entire family, his 2 children, Sophia and Jesse, and his wife, Jennifer, during the early morning hours of Tuesday, November 20th. Specifically, we allege that the defendant repeatedly shot and killed his brother while he was outside of the side of his home, and then moved to murder the rest of the family inside the home. We allege that Jennifer was shot and stabbed, and the 2 Canero children were repeatedly stabbed by knife. We also allege that after murdering the Canero family, the defendant then set fire to the house at 15 Willowbrook in Colts Neck in an effort to conceal and disguise his earlier committed crimes. Now, as I mentioned, the defendant was served with these charges this morning, and he will have an initial appearance and detention hearing for these charges, as well as the charges that were filed last week on the aggravated arson out of Ocean Township. That hearing will be held before the Honorable James McGann at the Monmouth County Superior Court tomorrow at 9 a.m. As for the status of the medical examiner's investigation, Keith Canero's cause and manner of death was ruled to be multiple gunshot wounds by homicide. Jennifer, Jesse, and Sophia's cause and manner of death remain open, pending toxicology reports. But as I mentioned last week when we spoke about this case, it is the state's position and allegations that they were the victims of homicidal violence, as indicated by the charges that were filed today. The cause of the 2 fires at the Ocean Township home and the Colts Neck home has been determined to be arson by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and ATF has further determined that the origin of the Colts Neck fire was in the basement, and the origin of the Ocean Township fire was 2 exterior locations at each end of the house in Ocean Township. Now, there's been extensive speculation about the timeline or order of events as it pertained to the fires in these 2 towns. We allege that the Colts Neck incident happened in the early morning hours of last Tuesday, November 20th. We also allege that the defendant returned to his house in Ocean Township with certain items of evidence that he retained from the Colts Neck crime scene. And I can't provide any further description as to that type of evidence because of the ethical and legal rules that constrain us. From there, we allege the defendant intentionally set fire in his home at or about 5 a.m. for the purpose of both destroying evidence of his earlier crimes in Colts Neck and to also create the illusion that the overall Canero family was somehow victimized or targeted. We allege that it was a ruse. Now, understandably, many have questioned and wondered about a motive to these alleged crimes. Based on our investigation to date, we believe that the defendant's motive was financial in nature, stemming from his and the victim's joint business ventures that they owned and operated out of Asbury Park. As a result, we have also launched a financial investigation into the business and financial dealings of the defendant. Now, with these types of investigations, they take time. So I won't be able to provide any further information as to motive at this point in time. But I would encourage you to continue to follow this case as it proceeds through the criminal justice system. As court appearances occur, there will likely be information that's presented on the record by the state in this case. Bringing together a case like this takes a true team effort, and I'm honored to be joined by some of the agency heads, detectives, and prosecutors, all of whom played a vital role in bringing this case to a head with these charges today. The investigation necessarily required the support of a number of law enforcement partners who stand with me here today, and I would like to personally commend them and give them our thanks. The Colts Neck Police Department, represented by Acting Chief Frank Lessess. The Ocean Township Police Department, represented by Chief Steve Peters. The Monmouth County Sheriff's Office, represented by Sheriff Sean Golden. The New Jersey State Police, represented today by Lieutenant Colonel Scott Ebner and Major Mike Kane. The New Jersey Regional Computer Forensics Laboratory, represented by Deputy Director Lieutenant Cy Blystein. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, represented today by Special Agent in Charge John DeVito. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, represented by Special Agent in Charge Greg Erie. The Monmouth County Fire Marshals, who represent the entire fire community, who's here today represented by Kevin Stout. And then finally, so many members of my investigative and legal staff at the Monmouth County Prosecutor's Office, some of whom join me up here today. These individuals and so many others spent countless hours and continue to spend countless hours working on these investigations. I want to convey my sincere thanks and gratitude to those involved in this case who worked tirelessly, particularly through the Thanksgiving holiday, to solve this case and bring these charges to fruition today. These were your finest days, ladies and gentlemen, and this is your finest hour. And it is my greatest honor to work with you in the law enforcement community as we stand here today. I'm humbled by your partnership, and I look forward to that continuing on through this case and any other case that comes through Monmouth County. As to our cases, they remain active and ongoing. And to that end, anyone in the public with information on these matters or any others that might relate to the Colts Neck or arson incidents, I would encourage you to contact law enforcement. If it involves the Colts Neck incident, please call Monmouth County Detective Pat Petrozello at 800-733-7443 or Colts Neck Detective Richard Zarillo at 732-780-7323. If it involves the Ocean Township case, please contact Monmouth County Detective Brian Weisbrot at 800-733-7443 or Ocean Township Detective Chris Brady at 732-531-1800. And as to those 4 detectives that are running the point on these 2 investigations that stand up here behind me today, I want to commend you on your outstanding work and thank you on behalf of a grateful county and a grateful law enforcement community. Finally, to the victim family members and the friends of the Canaro family and to the entire Colts Neck community, it's not lost upon us how troubling and confusing this incident has been to you and how unusual these circumstances are as alleged. Our collective hearts in the law enforcement community go out to you for the loss of Keith, Jennifer, Jesse, and Sophia. In this case, we started strong thanks to this team effort, and I want those victims and those community members and friends to know that we're going to finish this case strong too. We won't stop until we bring justice in the name of Keith Canaro and his entire lovely family. For further updates on these charges as they proceed through the criminal justice process, please continue to follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, at our webpage. Our Twitter handle is @MonCoProsecutor. And as of Monday, anybody in the community or the public is able to download a free app under the Monmouth County Prosecutor's name that will share with you all things relating to Monmouth County law and public safety, to include this case. And with that, I'll take questions, do the best I can to answer them under these limited circumstances. Brian.
Can you at all make sense out of why someone would go, if it's a financial issue between 2 brothers, why would you kill the mother and 2 children, the wife?
Look, Brian, I get questions like that all the time. I have 2 answers for you. The first is I have to defer to the evidence that's going to be presented at trial if this case gets indicted by a grand jury. The second is I can't read what's in a person's, or in this case, a defendant's head. Motive is not an element of these crimes, but it is something that we will be presenting to a jury one day if this case is returned as a true bill. That's the best I can offer you right now. Yes, sir.
Chris, you mentioned you cannot really go into the motive. You said it was financial, but can you talk at all about what led you guys to kind of look in that direction, even generally speaking?
Well, you recall last week there was a great effort that was undertaken by the fire community here in Monmouth County. It took nearly a day for that scene to be secured at Colts Neck. And after it was rendered sound by county engineers, I have fabulous investigators that have worked with us on this case and at the Ocean Township case. The only thing I can say is that we recovered a great deal of evidence, and that evidence is being analyzed as we speak here today by many of the agencies that are represented by these partners behind me. I can't comment substantively on the quality or quantum of our proofs. The only thing I can say is that at this point in the stage, we are confident in our proofs, or else we wouldn't have charged this case the way we did. And the only thing I can tell you is just to continue to follow this case. As there are future court appearances, then information will be presented during those appearances as part of the public record. Yes, ma'am.
In terms of a financial motive, now that Paul Panero has been charged with the murders and the arson of the Colts Neck house, do you believe your investigation will stem outward further into financial crimes and organized crime in terms of, establishing more of a reason that there was a financial motive?
No, that's a fair question. At this point in time, remember, we are just assessing motive, and we're conducting a financial investigation. I don't have any reason to believe that there's I can't tell you if charges are or are not coming. As to the angle that you mentioned about organized crime, we have no reason to believe that there's any aspect of organized crime involved in these two investigations. And that's in partnership with not just county and state law enforcement agencies, but in our partnership with federal law enforcement agencies. But I qualify that by saying this case, as is every other case, they are fluid. So this is an active and ongoing investigation. Yes, sir.
Has the suspect been cooperating with you? What's his demeanor like? How difficult has it been to build the case against him?
Well, the suspect has been in jail since we charged him last week. So by virtue of that, because he's incarcerated pending trial, he has to be cooperative. As far as the service of charges go, they occurred this morning without incident. Yes, ma'am.
Did he target his family? Did he try to kill his wife and his kids? And after these charges, are they still standing behind him?
I couldn't speak to what the family is or is not doing on behalf of the defendant, but as I mentioned, we charged the defendant with aggravated arson of his own home last week. So we allege that because it's a second-degree crime, we allege that his family was put in danger by virtue of that. That said, today I've shared that it is our theory and belief that that fire was effectively a ruse designed to make it appear as if the overall Canero family was somehow targeted. Yes, sir, in the back.
So on the timeline, so he kills Keith and his family, and that's overnight, and then he goes back to his house and sets the fire to hide the evidence. When does he start the fire back in Colts Neck? Does he do that early, and then you don't see it until 12:38?
Now, that's a fair question. We allege he started the fire in the early morning hours of Tuesday, November 20th, after he allegedly murdered Keith Canero and his family. Now, it's a fair point about the fire not being reported at 12:38. Based on what we know from cause of origin of that fire, it was started in the basement. It continued to smolder until when there was entry made into the home, a great deal of oxygen coming into the home effectively fed that fire. So it wasn't reported until 12:38, and what we believe caused the fire to catch on from there is likely the feeding of oxygen as the house was entered into.
So he had started the fire after he killed him early.
So he goes on to answer more questions there in Freehold, New Jersey. That was this morning. Those charges came out, and really just a tragic story, and one that broke, I believe, last week. And we were all talking about what may have happened between these two families. Turns out they were brothers, and he shot his own brother outside and killed that brother's family inside the home. So those charges now coming down, 4 counts of murder for that individual in New Jersey. Right now, Rod Rosenstein is talking about cyber crime. He's at Georgetown University Law Center, so I'll show you a little piece of that as well. But I also want to throw up in just a couple of moments here a little video from this morning after General Motors shuts down about 15,000 jobs. House Democrats had a response to that this morning, and I want to show you their take on that auto industry loss. But first, here is the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein.
Exploiting our dependency on data was a technological innovation in cybercrime and a novel business model. Ransomware caused an estimated $5 billion of damage last year. Just yesterday at the department, we announced an indictment in a case charged in New Jersey that involved a ransomware attack that spread across many places in the United States and foreign countries as well, in particular Canada. It's known as the SamSam ransomware virus, which specifically targeted public entities, hospitals, and city and state government agencies. When I say specifically targeted, it wasn't automatic. It actually was a conscious effort by the criminals who designed the ransomware to target entities that they knew would require access to that data and might be willing to pay ransom to get it back. According to the allegations in that indictment, these two defendants were Iranian citizens in Iran who perpetrated this scheme from abroad, which is very common. And according to the allegations in the indictment, there was a total of $30 million in damages, and the criminals successfully extorted about $6 million in ransom payments. And that's just the monetary cost of the damage. The impact in terms of inconvenience on the people who are unable to access information, people in Atlanta, for example, who are unable to get access to their driver's license data, or patients who are unable to get their medical information from hospitals. It's hard to measure that. It's impossible to measure that in dollars. Without a concerted effort to alter our trajectory, the malicious use of technology, such as in that case, will be more pernicious and more pervasive tomorrow than it is today, and even more difficult to combat. During my lifetime, the technology sector has grown from almost nothing to playing a central role in almost everything that we do in our lives. The growth and profitability of the tech sector is enhanced by quick and bold moves. The first adopters make the most money. But being the first to market is a goal of every technology company. A company that develops a killer app or the next must-have household device can achieve market dominance almost overnight. A near monopoly benefits. Consider Twitter, for example. In just 5 years, between 2010 and 2015, the Twitter community of users exploded from 30 million to over 300 million worldwide, making it one of the most influential communications providers on the planet. And it expanded from a mere communications device to a source of news and information for many people in our country and throughout the world. The market quickly rewards novel products. The unintended adverse consequences, though, only emerge over time. Now, building secure devices requires additional testing and validation. It slows production times, and it costs more money. Moreover, enhanced security can sometimes result in less user-friendly products. It's inconvenient to type your zip code at the gas station or to type a password into your smartphone. Creating more secure devices risks building a product that will be later to market, costlier, and harder to use. That's a fundamental misalignment of economic incentives with the goal of security. Other misalignments impacting security and accountability exist. Consider the Internet of Things, or IoT. Many Americans have no idea what that is, but those of you who are in the business understand the implications. In 2016, a botnet of IoT devices was used to launch the largest distributed denial of service attack ever. The attack originated from thousands of IoT devices infected with what was known as the Mirai malware. Unlike other malware, Mirai was written specifically to infect IoT devices. It turned those everyday products into an army of devices capable of transmitting torrents of data that knocked targeted databases offline. A Mirai attack against a well-known blogger's website, for example, was 35 times larger than any DDoS attack that site had ever faced. And one day in October of 2016, thousands of Mirai-infected IoT devices unleashed a torrent of traffic that overwhelmed an internet services company. Many high-tech websites, high-traffic websites that relied on that company were inaccessible for substantial periods of time during the day of that attack. But fortunately, FBI and DHS agents identified and arrested the creators of the Mirai malware, and they pleaded guilty last year, so those perpetrators were held accountable. The Mirai botnet was targeted at IoT devices with poor security features. According to one security researcher, an estimated 500,000 devices can be hijacked using default passwords and usernames. But keep in mind that the Mirai software exploited just tens of thousands of devices, so consider the potential damage that can be done with those devices. We depend on technology, but technology that lacks security can be a menace, and market forces do not require companies to anticipate and to prevent misuse of their products in those ways. The talent and the capacity for improving cybersecurity, thwarting cyber threats, and improving our security posture is distributed across the private and public sectors and academia, as reflected by the people in this room. No one should be under the illusion that law enforcement alone is the answer for resolving these challenges, but law enforcement is part of the solution. You cannot deter malicious uses of technology without having a credible capacity to impose punishment for committing fraud, hacking into information systems, stealing data, and disabling computers. The ability to attribute the source of an attack or an intrusion is critical to law enforcement's ability to help. It's impossible to employ criminal enforcement tools and other forms of retribution without first identifying the perpetrators, whether they are ordinary criminals or transnational organized crime entities or hostile nation-state actors. Law enforcement agencies therefore work with our intelligence community partners to play a major role in identifying who is responsible for cyber intrusions and where in the world they're located. Apart from battling cyber threats, technology also influences other crime-fighting efforts. Our ability to gather electronic evidence increasingly relies on remote communication service providers and device manufacturers. I hate to sound old, but I started prosecuting almost 30 years ago, and it was a completely different world. I reflect on the challenges that white-collar prosecutors face today compared to me. We'd execute a search warrant, you'd go into the location of the business, the files would all be physically present on paper in the business. You would haul out a couple of boxes of documents and you'd spend a couple of days reviewing them and you'd have your case. Yet today, you go raid the target of a fraud case, you might not find anything relevant there. It's all going to be in digital form, and it might be stored in foreign countries, in a variety of foreign countries. The perpetrators, the employees might not even be there. They might be overseas. The challenges that we face today are magnitudes exponentially larger and more challenging than what I faced as a young prosecutor. So there are multiple factors that drive the decisions of the companies that create new technology. The companies are in the business of creating profits. I don't blame them for failing to consider law enforcement and public safety concerns. But when you hear corporate lawyers complain about law enforcement demands, it's important to keep in mind that what is good for a technology company in terms of bottom line profits is not necessarily good for America. Their interests are not always aligned with yours. Much of what they do to earn money does provide great public benefits, but economic competitiveness in global markets is not informed by general concerns about public good. Furthermore, some communication providers chronically understaff their offices that respond to legal process from law enforcement. In some cases, the lack of personnel causes lengthy delays in producing evidence, even when production is ordered by a court, and even when they agree to produce the information, when it's not protected by encryption. The impact of their decisions on law enforcement's ability to investigate crimes and enforce laws is far-reaching, because electronic evidence held by third parties is now essential to almost every type of investigation that we conduct. Pedophiles teach others how to evade detection on darknet message boards. Gangs plan murders using social media. And extortionists deliver their demands through email and text messages. So it's important for those of us in law enforcement to raise the alarm and put the public on notice about the impact of technological barriers to obtaining electronic evidence. One example of such a barrier is warrant-proof encryption, where tech companies design their products or services in such a way that they claim it's impossible for them to assist in executing a court-authorized warrant. These barriers have a dramatic impact on our cases, and they are a significant detriment to public safety. Technology manufacturers, we believe, share a duty to comply with the law and to support public safety and not just user privacy. It's not inconsistent to value both securing devices against illegal intrusion and providing lawful access with judicial orders. Obviously, the strongest possible encryption would be impregnable even to law enforcement officers with a court order. But responsible encryption is achievable, and in certain contexts, it already exists. We encourage technology companies to develop responsible encryption, effective secure encryption that resists criminal intrusion, but allows lawful access with court authorization. As an analogy, we require buildings to disable elevators in the event of a fire, but we also expect them to retain the capacity for firemen to use them in an emergency. Whatever structures we build, whether physical or virtual, someone should always have the ability to access it in an emergency. But the key does not need to be held by a single entity, and it certainly does not need to be held by the government. It just needs to be available somewhere, so in the event of an emergency with the appropriate standard of proof and an order by an independent court, it's accessible, just like everything else throughout history has been accessible with proper lawful process. Law enforcement's efforts to preserve the ability to gather court-ordered electronic evidence sometimes are met with mistrust, skepticism, and even derision. Some in the tech community and academia have responded dismissively to the problem of law enforcement's diminishing ability to collect evidence, claiming that law enforcement will find other ways of solving crimes. They like to point to other abilities that we have. And the impact of technology means that even if one form of technology is inaccessible, people may leave tracks in other types of technology so that there will be other ways, they say, to solve crimes. Well, that's true in some cases, but in many cases we will not find another way to solve crimes. And in some matters, we may be able to get the evidence we need eventually, but it may come at a great cost in terms of harm to future victims and expense to government agencies. Improvements in the ability to investigate crime and hold perpetrators accountable must match the pace at which technology is making crimes easier to commit and more destructive. Some technology experts castigate colleagues who engage with law enforcement to address encryption and similar challenges. Just because people are quick to criticize you does not mean you're doing the wrong thing. Take it from me. There is nothing virtuous about refusing to help develop responsible encryption or in shaming people who understand the dangers of creating any spaces, whether real world or virtual, where people are free to victimize others without fear of getting caught or punished. Imagine, as an analogy, somebody decides a pedophile wants to build a building with no windows and doors and keep children inside. You know, we wouldn't accept that. That's the same sort of thing that's being achieved in the virtual world if we permit people to create these these technological virtual spaces that are inaccessible to law enforcement. I recently came across an article about Ray Ozzie, a noted technologist who once served as Microsoft's chief technical officer, as well as its chief software architect. On his own initiative, Ozzie reportedly developed a system that he believes could allow law enforcement access to encrypted data without significantly increasing security risks for users. Now, I'm not a technology expert. I don't know whether that system works, but I applaud anyone who works constructively on solutions to the challenge of providing security against computer intrusions without eliminating protection by law enforcement. We should not let ideology or dogma stand in the way of constructive academic engagement. The technologists, cryptographers, and researchers working on this problem, they all recognize that law enforcement has a duty to pursue solutions to these problems so that we can do the job the American people expect us to do: promote justice, protect public safety, deter crime, and punish criminals. I believe the American public is not going to accept a situation where law enforcement has to tell them, we can't help you, we can't catch the criminals who are abusing your children, who are committing fraud against you, who are destroying your electronic devices, because we're unable to access the software, the devices that they're using to commit those crimes. The public will not accept that. So I encourage security researchers, technology companies, academics, information security professionals, and others in the private sector to keep searching for constructive solutions that will enable us to harness the wonder of new advances without descending into technological anarchy. I'm grateful to Georgetown for joining with the Department of Justice to provide a forum for discussing these important issues, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much. Lori already has some questions.
I do already have some questions. If you could please hold up your cards and pass them to the end if you have any questions you'd like to be considered. I'm going to abuse the position of chair in a sense, and I'd like to lead off actually with two. The first one really playing to your expertise from Graham. You mentioned in your discussion today, electronic information held by third-party companies is essential to prosecution. What's the future of third-party doctrine post-Carpenter? How do you read that case?
Read it as narrowly as possible. As I said, I think that certainly under existing law, when I argued the Fourth Circuit case, it seemed pretty straightforward. The third-party doctrine was secure. The majority of the court obviously agreed with us. The judges, really without regard to their own legal philosophy, almost all, I think it was 12-3 or overwhelmingly agreed with us as a matter of law. Obviously, the Supreme Court has the ability to change the law. And I don't think we yet know what the implications are going to be. Is this a one-off case? Is location data going to be deemed to be constitutionally unique? Or is that really opening the door to the end of the third-party doctrine, which really those of us who have been practicing law, rights and criminal law in particular, that was a pretty bright line, and nobody's entirely sure where the new line may be. So I regret that I do not have a solid answer for you. But the reason I say as narrowly as possible is because consider the implications. I mean, those of you who are in law enforcement, even defense attorneys, I think appreciate the potential chaos that could result if we were in a situation where law enforcement was unable to obtain information from third parties. Where do you get evidence? I mean, your typical case is not made by somebody confessing. It's made by collecting evidence, usually evidence, information that is in the hands of third parties. And so for those reasons, I think it's certainly appropriate that the case be read narrowly.
Great. Question from the floor. How is DOJ measuring and evaluating its progress in bringing malicious cyber actors to justice? And what would success look like?
Wondering who wrote that, because that's a question I always ask in my meetings. How are we measuring success? I've been in the department for almost 30 years, and one thing you may notice is you see a lot of department leaders at press conferences, like Deputy Attorney General, for example, saying, this is the record-setting case. We've never had a case involving more money or larger recovery. And I try to keep people focused on the fact that our goal is to reduce crime. It's not to have bigger and bigger cases. So it's a challenging issue. And I don't have a clear answer for you, but it's not just measured by the number of cases we bring, obviously. Bringing cases is a tool that we use to reduce crime. We have to find ways to measure the impact of our cases apart from just counting the number of cases or the significance of the cases themselves.
So just to follow on that, the department announced this week 2 indictments, right? One for the ransomware scheme and the other for the botnets. Could you just briefly touch on those and how they reflect the department's policies?
Sure. You actually have a number of our computer crime prosecutors in the audience. So some of you are probably more expert and are surely more expert in this than I am. But I think what those cases reflect, they reflect 2 things. First of all, they reflect our capability. And I think that's a really important point. That's one of the reasons why we decide to hold a press conference. We indict cases every day. We don't always hold press conferences. But our goal is to send a message that we can catch you. And if we can catch 2 people sitting in Iran, which is not exactly a friendly ally of the United States, if we can identify those people by name, and in one case we even published the suspect's photograph, we can identify you anywhere in the world. And so that is, I think, illustrates the government's capability to overcome these technological hurdles. Now, we're not always overcoming them. You don't hear about the cases we don't solve, and we recognize that the technological challenges are always advancing. But I think they're important, as I said, in illustrating that nobody should feel safe. People who believe that they have anonymity are often mistaken, because we do have a lot of very smart people working for us, and we have a lot of allies in the private sector who cooperate with us to help us identify perpetrators of these crimes. That's number one. Number two, the cases illustrate our commitment in terms of resources. We have, when I joined the criminal division of the Justice Department, we didn't have a computer crime section. Remember, they created it. I think it probably had half a dozen lawyers initially. Now there are scores of lawyers within the Justice Department, our National Security Division, our Criminal Division, and throughout all of our U.S. Attorney's offices who are experts in cyber crime and in computer issues. And we have law enforcement agents who are trained and develop expertise in these areas. Our big challenge is, once we train them, is keeping them, as you know, because these skills are highly prized in the private sector. But I hope that announcements like those cases do illustrate the commitment of the government in terms of resources and the capability in terms of expertise to uncover those crimes.
So your remarks emphasize the U.S. private sector. One of the questions is, to the extent you're able to comment, how cooperative have foreign ISPs and servers been with U.S. law enforcement regarding the investigation and prosecution of cybercrimes?
It depends on the identity of the provider and also on the government. But one of the important things that we do in the Justice Department at the leadership levels is to promote working relationships with foreign government agencies. And we're actually pretty good at that. And so we do, both within the department and within our law enforcement agencies, have liaisons. And we actually have folks who are based overseas in many countries that we deal with on a regular basis. And we maintain those relationships. So that's part of the solution. Part of it, though, is technological, and part of it is legal. And so we work with foreign countries on the legal regimes to ensure that they're in position to provide data to us when we need it. We passed last year, earlier this year, the Cloud Act, something you may be familiar with, which is an effort to overcome some of the challenges that we've faced in the past in terms of providing electronic data under MLATs. It's an ability, a more efficient way to exchange data for law enforcement purposes. And the Cloud Act actually just gives us a tool, the ability to enter into these agreements with foreign countries. We haven't entered one yet. We're actually still working on what we hope will be our first agreement under the Cloud Act. But that's one example of what we're doing to try to keep up in terms of our regulatory regime and our coordination with foreign governments with the technological challenges that we face. And that's an area, by the way, sounding the theme of optimism and coordination, where tech companies actually were very cooperative and supportive of our Cloud Act because they face these challenges too. And one of the things you want if you're in business is you want a stable legal regime where you have clear answers. You don't want to be in a situation where you've got conflicting laws and you're afraid that if you comply with a demand from one country, you're going to be in violation of the law in another country. And so that is one illustration of how we're working cooperatively with other countries to try to overcome technological and legal hurdles.
This morning, Pete Singer, author of Like War, The Weaponization of Social Media, talked about how Facebook is no longer a dorm room project, that in fact now the company with 2.8 billion users, they hold really the world's nervous system in their hands. So their decisions can impact crime, terrorist recruitment, political movements. They could potentially destabilize democracy. Are you comfortable with Silicon Valley making the call? And if not, what new laws commensurate with First and Fourth Amendment and other rights would you like to see put into place or considered by Congress?
Rate of horribles that he laid out for you. But I think we are so far ahead today of where we were in 2016 in terms of understanding the dangers posed by these technologies and recognizing, number one, recognizing how they can be abused, but number two, expecting them to hold themselves accountable. Because of the First Amendment, there are limits on the government's ability to police social networks. We can't tell them what they can and can't say. Some foreign countries, they do that, not here. So we rely on self-policing, self-regulation, and you've seen some of the companies responding, and in fact, some of them are working cooperatively with us, and you'll see occasionally in our public announcements of cases, you'll see an acknowledgement of cooperation we've gotten from Facebook or other social media companies. And of course, they get flogged on the Hill from time to time. I've had experience with that myself. And that can be an effective form of oversight as well. But ultimately, Congress the question is there going to be any bite? Is Congress going to conclude that they need to regulate? And I think the companies now understand that if they do not take it upon themselves to self-regulate, which is essentially the theme of my talk today, that they will face the potential of governmental regulation. And so I hope, I think it actually works to our advantage that these companies tend to be so large because they do have the ability and incentive to self-regulate in order to avoid the kind of hostile regulation that might impede their business models. So I think there is, certainly as I said, we're far ahead of where we were in 2016. The 2018 election, I think, raised comparatively few issues. It's not that we don't have challenges. It's not that we don't face the same and even more hostile state actors who would be more than happy to try to undermine American democracy. But we're more aware of it, and these companies are more motivated, I think, to try to prevent it.
Okay, two final questions. You mentioned anticipating worst-case scenarios needs to be part of the development process for technology companies, but how does that point carry over to U.S. critical infrastructure operators who may use that technology in ways the developer did not anticipate?
Well, if the user using, first of all, the worst-case scenario concept, from my perspective, entails the producer of the product trying to think through what all the potential uses are, right? So that's number one, is try to brainstorm about the worst-case scenarios. But as Laura mentioned, so maybe there are going to be uses that the technology creator did not anticipate. Well, I think that would fall upon whoever's developing that use. If you're developing new use for a technology, then you're essentially the innovator. It's your responsibility to make sure you're using it appropriately. But this is all very theoretical, hard to discuss without thinking in practical terms. But I think that would be my answer, that whoever's developing the new use, essentially, who's ever doing that kind of innovation should think through what the adverse consequences might be.
Okay, final question. As Deputy Attorney General, you must be briefed about all manner of cyber threats. What keeps you up at night?
Do I have to answer this honestly?
Preferably.
Yes. I've often come and I slept a lot better in my last job. But I think the truthful answer to it is, as a U.S. attorney, I've been in law enforcement for almost 3 decades. I was U.S. attorney for 12 years. But as a U.S. attorney, your focus is more domestic, obviously. And so the thing that I probably learned the most about in this job was national security. We were in the law enforcement business when I was U.S. attorney, and we do have, in each of our U.S. attorney's offices, there's a national security division that focuses on local threats. But one of the things we do get briefed on in the leadership positions in Washington is the national threats and the international threats. And so you come to appreciate the scale of the foreign threats that we face, the scope and scale of foreign threats that we face, and the cyber threats in particular. And that's something that I certainly didn't appreciate fully before I took this job, and it is something that has concerned me. As I've spent a fair amount of time on it. That task force report is one example, anticipating and not only dealing with challenges we already face, but anticipating things like deep fakes and the challenges we're going to face in the future. And one of the things that concerns me is the need for strategic thinking by the government. We were criticized, actually, my administration was criticized recently prior to the election by people who said, well, we weren't prepared. We actually were far more prepared than anybody had been before. But it's got to be an ongoing effort, and we're going to need a lot of smart people to work with us to anticipate these challenges and to develop effective ways to prevent them. So that's my honest answer to your question.
Thank you. I hope you will join me in thanking Mr. Rosenstein for his time here today. We'll have the next panel come up, please.
All right, Rod Rosenstein live at Georgetown University today. We pretty much took that in its entirety, so we want to thank you for joining us. And scroll back at any time if you want to see some of the archived words that he had to say today. We also have some other interesting things. We got a couple guests here, our anchors, Allison Seymour and Steve Chenevy, talking about some of the news of the day, as well as some of the politics that broke during this morning. But that will kind of round out our coverage. We're going to keep our eye on video to see if anything breaks, if anything's streaming or coming into our newsroom. We'll make sure we bring that to you here on our live stream. So thanks for watching Fox 5 Live. We'll catch you again tomorrow, same time on YouTube here, or if you're on our website, we're right at the bottom of the website, fox5dc.com. So don't forget to continue to follow us on all digital platforms. Fox 5 DC, you can catch us right there. And we'll see you again tomorrow for Friday. Have a great week, guys. We're nearing the end of November. We'll catch you for that last day of November tomorrow, Friday, November 30th. All right, see you then.